Mom chose my toxic stepsister over me and kicked me out, but years later, I'm engaged and his company dropped her husband's contract as a client, and now she's blaming me. I'm a 26-year-old woman engaged to my fiancé, Jeff, who's also 26. We met on a dating app 4 years ago and have been together ever since. Jeff is my soulmate, the one person who has never disappointed me. My life hasn't been easy. My parents split up when I was only 2 years old, and my dad never really bothered with me afterward. While he did pay child support, he never showed much interest in being a part of my life. My mom, who's 48, wasn't exactly a great mom either. She was more focused on her own interests than on raising me. I basically grew up with nannies and babysitters. When I got older, I realized my mom was more into her social life than being a parent. She was a freelance artist and made enough money, thanks to child support, to not worry about me much. Honestly, I think if it wasn't for the money, she would have kicked me out long ago. She never seemed attached to me and mostly just waited for me to grow up and leave her alone. When I was about 13, my mom started dating Matt, who was 50. He had a daughter my age named Jess. When they first came over, my mom stressed how important it was for me to behave well. It struck me because she'd never cared about that with my previous boyfriends. Normally, she just let me know guests were coming, and I'd hide in my room until they left. But this time, I sensed my mom was serious about this guy, Matt. Otherwise, she wouldn't have bothered about my behavior. It made me realize she wouldn't have even noticed me if she wasn't into him. When I first met Matt and Jess, they seemed nice, and the introduction went smoothly. Little did I know what was coming next. Matt started coming over more often, and it felt like they were practically moving in together. It didn't bother me much as long as they left me alone. I was fine with it. They became a regular presence, with Jess visiting occasionally as she split her time between her mom's and our place. At first, they either treated me okay or just ignored me, which suited me fine since I wasn't too fond of any of them. I didn't care much about my mom, so caring about people connected to her was hard. All I wanted was some peace and quiet, which I had for a while. Then they decided to move in together permanently. I wouldn't have minded, but my mom said I had to share my room with my stepsister now. I refused. That room was mine, always had been, and it was the only place I felt at peace. In that house, I had my own little corner, and I wasn't about to give up my freedom by sharing my room with someone I barely knew. When I told my mom I wasn't going to share, we had a huge argument. She threatened to kick me out if I didn't obey. I was only 14, but I knew my rights. I felt like I had to stand my ground because my mom wasn't exactly trustworthy. Plus, it just made sense. I knew she couldn't kick me out until I was an adult without getting in trouble. So I called her bluff and told her she couldn't do it. She was frustrated but had to give in and let me keep my room. Instead, she decided to transform the basement into Jess's room. It wasn't as nice as mine, but my mom worked hard to make it comfortable. When she was finished, it looked just as good as any other room in the house. So I didn't see why it was such a big deal. But that's when Jess started disliking me, and I think it had something to do with my mom announcing to everyone during the house tour that Jess had to live in the basement because I wasn't willing to share my room. I couldn't understand why she'd make such a public announcement. I still can't figure out why she did it. Maybe she wanted to make me feel guilty by announcing it in front of Jess. But it just made me uncomfortable. Or perhaps she enjoys drama and wanted Jess to know I refused to share my room, which caused tension between us because Jess didn't seem like the type to let things slide. My mom's prediction was right. Jess didn't let it go, and from that day on, she treated me like the enemy. Even though she spent half a month with her mom, the days she was with us were unbearable. She was constantly mean to me and made hurtful remarks right to my face. Let me paint a picture of the things she would say. Once, she suggested that my dad left my mom because of me, and then she laughed as if it were a joke. She'd also poke fun at my looks, especially because I was a bit chubby back then. At school, she had a group of mean girls, and she never missed a chance to join in on bullying me with them. Before, she and her friends would just ignore me, and I preferred that. We were never friends, but that was better than being enemies. What hurt the most was that I hadn't even done anything to her. She was just upset that I didn't want to share my room with her. It seemed like such a silly reason for her to hate me so much and make my life miserable. My room was my sanctuary, especially with a mom like mine. Who could blame me for wanting my own space? Besides, if any of them had bothered to get to know me, I might have considered sharing. But she was a stranger, and I wasn't comfortable sacrificing my privacy for her. I never complained to my mom or Matt because they knew and didn't care. They'd turn a blind eye to my struggles because I wasn't important to them. So I had to endure it and let her walk all over me. I try to stand up for myself sometimes, but it only made things worse. Our parents would intervene, and I'd end up getting grounded because, well, they favored her. She'd cry a bit and get away with it, but I couldn't fake tears like her, and I wasn't that manipulative. So I'd be the one punished while she got off easy, and I had to deal with it. Growing up there was awful, and I despised my life. When I was finally kicked out around my 18th birthday, I felt more relieved than anything else. I had endured my family's chaos for years, and it only got worse over time. Jess remained a nightmare to deal with, and our parents blindly supported her, no matter what. Over 4 years, she turned our entire high school year against me, and I was left with only a few friends who still talked to me. Everyone else despised me just because she did, and that was reason enough. It took a toll on my mental health, and I struggled in every aspect. I gained a lot of weight from binge eating, which worsened my appearance. I was overweight, battling acne, and my hair was a mess. On top of that, my grades were suffering, so not only did I look bad, but I also seemed unintelligent to everyone else. I had nothing going for me and hit rock bottom. Home life wasn't any better with Jess and my parents. My mom became increasingly unbearable, constantly comparing me to Jess, despite knowing she made my life worse. Things were bad before my mom married Matt and they moved in together, but they weren't this bad. It was disheartening that my mother didn't care about me before, but after she married Matt, things went from bad to worse. She went from being indifferent to actively making me feel terrible about myself. It felt like I was living with mean girls at home too. It was clear to me that Jess was the daughter my mother truly wanted, and I was just dealt the wrong cards. Both of them wished I'd disappear, and honestly, I wanted the same thing. My mother and Jess despised me, and Matt didn't care. With no other family besides my mother and no contact with my grandparents, I had nowhere to turn. I didn't feel right asking friends for help, so I toughed it out at home to at least have a roof over my head and food until I turned 18. But then, a couple of weeks before my birthday, something happened, and I was kicked out that same day. It was a weekend etched in my memory like it happened yesterday, one of the most traumatic and stressful days of my life. We had recently graduated, and Jess had started hanging out with a new, older crowd. She befriended someone whose brother, in his last year of college, became her boyfriend. They'd socialize with his friends, who were all older than us. I was aware of their activities but didn't dare tell my parents, fearing it would backfire. So I kept quiet about Jess drinking and likely smoking weed. I had no interest in those things. I was already struggling with weight and grades. I didn't need more trouble. But that day, I must have left my room unlocked before showering. Suddenly, I heard banging on the bathroom door, and my mother was screaming at me to come out immediately. I quickly dressed and rushed out to see what was going on. When I emerged from the shower, my mother, Matt, and Jess were waiting in my room, wearing serious expressions. My mother produced a bunch of empty beer bottles from under my bed, and even more damning, a large plastic baggie filled with what looked like grams of weed. I knew it wasn't mine, and so did Jess. But my parents didn't know that. Somehow, she must have planted it while I was away and then told my mom. They began yelling at me, accusing me of being a terrible person. It wasn't just about the alcohol and drugs. My mom also criticized me for being a disappointment and for eating all the food. She called me a waste, convinced I'd never amount to anything and would just keep living with them, wasting their money. I repeatedly tried to explain that none of it was mine, and I didn't know how it ended up in my room, but she wouldn't believe me. She got furious when I suggested Jess might have planted it to frame me. She yelled that I was always jealous of her and would never be as good at anything, which is why I was trying to shift the blame. I was in tears, but she didn't seem to care and kept yelling. Eventually, she stopped and told me I had to leave. I was baffled and asked her where I was supposed to go. She said she didn't care as long as I left because she was fed up with me. When I insisted I wasn't leaving, she threatened to call the cops and warned that at almost 18, they'd take drug charges seriously. She didn't want an addict in her house draining her resources. She said I had to fend for myself now because she was done pretending to be a happy family with someone who didn't deserve it. I begged her not to kick me out, knowing I had nowhere else to go and no money of my own. But she remained unmoved. She gave me until the end of the day to leave, or she'd call the police herself. I was stunned by her heartlessness, and even more so by the fact that neither Matt nor Jess objected. They acted like everything was normal. After a lot of tears and pleading, I reluctantly started packing my things. Between facing drug charges and living on the streets, I preferred the latter. By evening, I was finished packing. As I left the house, nobody said goodbye, and I didn't look back either. I spent a couple of hours at the park, but it got too cold, so I decided to go to a friend's place for the night, hoping they'd let me stay. I went to my best friend Amy's house and asked if I could stay for a few days. She already knew about my parents, so I didn't have to explain much. I shared the events of the day with her, and she was shocked. She suggested her parents could help if I let them. I'd always kept the way my parents treated me secret. Even from Amy's parents, unsure if anyone would believe me. I felt uncomfortable sharing such personal details of my life with others. That day, Amy insisted I tell her parents everything, and they were just as appalled as she was. They called my mother, trying to reason with her, but she was rude and unyielding. Realizing they couldn't change her mind, they did something incredibly kind. They offered to let me live with them for as long as I needed, promising their full support. They were well off, so money wasn't an issue, and Amy was willing to share her room with me because she cared about me. I spent the next few years living with them, attending community college since it was the only place I could get into with my grades. I worked and saved money to find my own place, but Amy's parents never pressured me to leave. They made sure I felt comfortable and supported. About 3 years ago, I finally saved enough to move out. I was proud of myself and deeply grateful to Amy and her parents. I couldn't have done it without them. Even on the day I moved out, Amy's parents helped me settle into my new place and assured me I was always welcome back to visit or even live with them again. It was a turning point in my life. By then, I had shed a lot of weight, improved my health, and felt much better overall. I was also earning enough to support myself and had spent a good amount of time working on myself. I decided to start dating because I eventually wanted to get married and needed to start looking. Before Jeff, I had met a few guys, but things never progressed far. When I met Jeff, everything clicked. I realized he was the one meant for me. He was funny, cute, and seemed genuinely interested in me. When we started dating, I didn't know he was wealthy or set to inherit his family's chain of restaurants. I just liked him for who he was. It was only after a few months that he shared his family background, and I learned about his future inheritance. Some might assume that learning about his wealth could alter things for me, but honestly, he remained the same person I knew all along. Knowing about his background didn't change my feelings, and I loved him just as deeply as before. After about a year of dating, we decided to move in together, and he introduced me to his family a few months prior. I got along well with everyone, and they all liked me. Everything seemed perfect, so when he proposed recently, saying yes was an easy decision. We've been engaged for 2 months now, and everything's been going wonderfully. Then, about 2 weeks ago, I received an email from Jess. We hadn't spoken in almost 8 years, and I hadn't heard from my family since I was kicked out. I was puzzled as to why she'd reach out now, especially to make amends. Enough time had passed, and neither of us seemed interested in fixing things. So when I read her email apologizing for everything and admitting she'd been awful, I was really confused. She confessed to orchestrating everything in my room because she simply loathed me for no apparent reason. It was baffling why she would confess to it years later, and I sensed something wasn't right about the situation. The timing was suspicious, especially since I had just gotten engaged, and she likely knew about it from social media or word of mouth. Given that we attended the same high school, I decided to investigate further. After some digging, I discovered that Jess's husband owned the business that supplied plastic containers for takeaway orders to Jeff's restaurants. It was relatively easy for me to gather this information by creating a fake profile and stalking her online. Her husband's bio mentioned his line of work, which aligned with what I already knew about Jeff's business plans. I immediately informed Jeff about the connection. In the past few years, I've made a conscious effort to distance myself from my old life, avoiding following any family members online and asking friends not to update me on their news. So I had no idea that Jess had gotten married until I discovered her husband's connection to our business dealings. Upon learning this, Jeff and I decided to terminate our contract with him. The costs were high, and more significantly, I couldn't bring myself to engage with Jess again. even on a professional level. Jeff also mentioned that the quality of the products from Jess's husband had deteriorated over time, and they were already considering switching suppliers. So last week, a few days after I received that email from Jess, Jeff held a meeting with her husband and ended their contract. However, Jess seems to believe that I orchestrated this to seek revenge on her. She's been accusing me of this through emails and social media posts, despite our lack of contact for almost a decade. While I might harbor some resentment, it's not the driving force behind her husband losing our contract. A few days ago, she posted on social media, stating that many clients had been dropping them lately, and this was the final blow. However, she insisted that our decision was fueled solely by spite and labeled it highly unprofessional. She even tagged our Facebook page, creating quite a messy situation. While I can't deny there was a personal aspect to our decision, she also mentioned in her post that she and her husband had been losing clients consistently. While I feel somewhat remorseful, especially considering her struggles, I believe our decision was based on both personal and professional factors. I feel a bit guilty for influencing my fiancé to sever ties with my estranged stepsister's husband, Aita. Update: Jeff consulted with his dad's lawyers, who agree that our actions were justified. We've decided to pursue legal action against them, demanding the removal of their defamatory posts and pressing charges. The truth is, the products we were receiving were overpriced and subpar, so naturally, we sought better options elsewhere. It's purely coincidental that I'm married to the owner of that business. Instead of improving their services, she chose to tarnish our reputation on social media. It's absurd that I even felt sympathy for her given everything she put me through. Your support has helped me see things clearly, so thank you all for your comments and encouragement. Update 2. Jeff and his father initiated a defamation lawsuit against Jess and her husband a few days ago. We're scheduled to meet with a court-appointed mediator soon. Meanwhile, my mother has once again taken it upon herself to defend her stepdaughter. It feels like a high school drama, but thankfully, I can ignore them now without worrying about my living situation. Despite my mother's attempts to provoke me, I've chosen to block her and focus on my own life. I refuse to let their negativity affect me. I'm engaged to the man of my dreams, and I'm about to start a new chapter in my life. I have no room for them or their drama. Update 3. Quick update for you all. We won the defamation lawsuit thanks to the relentless efforts of my father-in-law's lawyers. They were able to swiftly resolve the matter, holding Jess and her husband accountable for their actions. Hopefully, this will prompt them to prioritize their business and meet their clients' expectations. With the legal battle behind us, Jeff and I can now shift our focus entirely to planning our wedding. I'm beyond excited to marry Jeff, my soulmate. I've waited so long to find someone like him, and now that I have, I'm holding on tight.
Growing up was tough, with Dad always on my back. Mom passed away when I was little, so it was just the two of us, and Dad took the whole single parenting gig to another level. He had rules for everything. No hanging out with the kids who liked to race cars, no wild hair colors, and studying had to be my top priority. "Jenna, those kids are trouble, you hear me? Stay away from them," Dad would warn me, his voice stern, whenever he saw me chatting with the neighborhood thrill seekers. "But Dad, they're just having fun. We're not kids anymore." I'd shoot back, trying to stand my ground. "It ain't about age, it's about making smart choices. And dyeing your hair like a traffic light ain't smart," he'd say, squinting his eyes as if he could scare the rebellion out of me. I wasn't having any of it. "Maybe I want to stand out," I'd retort, my voice just as firm. Dad wasn't just a stickler at home. He had a reputation around town too, always preaching about responsibility and hard work. He meant well, but to me, it felt suffocating. Every time we clashed, which was often, I'd pack a bag and storm over to Aunt Marie's place. She was Dad's younger sister, lived a few blocks away, and was the exact opposite of him, easygoing and always with a smile. "Aunt Marie, why can't he just chill out? It's like he's stuck in some ancient times," I'd complain as soon as I dropped onto her couch. She'd chuckle, handing me a soda, before sitting down next to me. "Jenna, your dad's just scared. He lost your mom, and he's afraid of losing you too. But he sees the world his way, black and white. But that's just it. I'm not him. I need some color in my life, you know? I'd say, popping the can open. Marie would nod, her expression softening. He does go overboard. But he's not wrong about everything. Give it time, you'll see some of his points. That was Aunt Marie, always trying to bridge the gap between Dad and me. But back then, I couldn't see it. All I knew was that I wanted out. So, as soon as high school was over, I grabbed my chance. Thanks to my grades, I landed a scholarship and went off to college, leaving my hometown, and Dad, behind. College was freedom. For the first time, I made my own decisions without anyone looming over me. I dyed my hair purple, stayed out late, and, yes, even got involved with a group that loved street racing. But I kept my head in the books. I wasn't about to waste the scholarship or the opportunities one had fought so hard for. After 4 years of hard work and a fair share of fun, I graduated with a degree in accounting and a job offer from a respected firm in the city. My boss, Mr. Thompson, was a tough guy but fair, much like Dad and his expectations, but without the personal judgment. When I met Mike, it felt like hitting the jackpot. It was at a casual hangout with some friends from work. He was there with a buddy who knew one of my colleagues. Mike had that easy charm, a quick smile, and an infectious laugh that pulled you right in. We got talking, and it turned out we had a ton in common, both mad about classic rock, both foodies, and both into old movies. Ever seen Casablanca? He asked, eyes lighting up as he took a sip of his beer. Are you kidding? Here's looking at you, kid is my go-to toast. I laughed, thrilled to meet someone who shared my quirky interests. We hit it off immediately, and before long, we were inseparable. Dating Mike was a whirlwind of dinner dates, movie nights, and lazy weekends just lounging around. 6 months later, we were married. It felt right, like everything was falling into place. The first year was bliss. We talked about everything, made decisions together, shared our dreams and our bank accounts. I felt like I finally had the partnership I craved, equal, open, just perfect. But then, things started to change. It began subtly. One night, as I was getting ready to meet some friends for drinks after work, Mike frowned. You're going out again? You know, you've been kinda busy lately, he said, his tone more accusing than curious. Just catching up with the gang. It's been ages. I replied, trying to keep the mood light. Yeah, but maybe you should chill on the outings. We could use some us time. He insisted, not really asking but telling. I paused, a bit thrown off. Sure, we can plan something for the weekend? It didn't stop there. Mike's suggestions became rules. He started expressing his concerns about the time I spent with my friends and even my workmates. Then came the big ask. One evening, Mike was going through our finances, a spreadsheet open on his laptop, his brow furrowed in concentration. Babe, I've been thinking, he started, not looking up from the screen. It would make more sense if I managed our finances. Just hand over your account details. I hesitated, surprised. What? Why? I've been handling my finances since forever. It's just easier this way. I can keep track of our spending and savings. Plus, it's what a husband does, right? He said, finally looking up at me with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I felt a chill, but nodded, unsure. Okay, if you think it's best. From then on, Mike took control. He decided where we went, what we did on weekends, and how we spent our money. If I suggested something different, he'd shoot it down. No, that's not a good idea, he'd dismiss without discussion. As months passed, I found myself fading into the background of my own life. My friends stopped calling so much, knowing I'd likely say no. My world shrank to what Mike approved, and the vibrant, independent woman I once was began to disappear. I didn't even recognize myself anymore. Living near Mike and his parents seemed ideal at first, like having a close-knit family just next door. But reality bit hard and fast. His mom, Nancy, was a sweet talker with a controlling twist, and his dad, Frank, was just as invasive, treating our place like it was his own. One chilly evening, I was just getting home from a long day at work, my mind on the thousand things I still had to do, when Nancy called. Her voice was sugary sweet at first. "Jenna, darling, have you started dinner yet? Mike must be starving after his hard day," she cooed over the phone. "Actually, Nancy, I just walked in. Dinner's gonna be a bit late tonight," I replied, trying not to let my frustration show. Her tone flipped cold as ice. "Well, I hope Mike doesn't have to wait too long. A man needs his dinner on time, you know." It wasn't just the dinner comments. Nancy believed Mike should be pampered because his job was supposedly more demanding, despite us both working full-time. Her idea of fairness was skewed wildly in her son's favor. I was expected to handle everything else, cooking, cleaning, and then some. It didn't stop at our home either. Nancy had me over at their place regularly, pushing a broom or a mop into my hands the moment I stepped through the door. And Frank? He was no better. Weekends were his domain apparently. He'd show up at our house first thing Saturday morning, remote in hand, ready to take over the living room. The TV volume cranked so high it made the windows rattle. He'd settle in like a king. "Jenna, where's the beer? I thought you'd have stocked up for the weekend," Frank would bellow from his makeshift throne. "It's in the fridge, Frank," I'd call out, trying to hide my annoyance. Frank would grumble something under his breath about kids these days as he raided the refrigerator, leaving a trail of crumbs and empty bottles in his wake. Mike never said a word against it, always shrugging off my complaints. It was exhausting. Between my job, keeping our home, and catering to the whims of my in-laws, I was stretched thin. I began to lose pieces of myself, my time, and my sanity to their endless demands. Things at work took a sharp turn when my company decided to absorb a smaller firm. The accounting department there was a mess, a tangled web of inaccuracies and outdated systems. It fell on me to sort it all out, which meant long hours and even more stress. Coming home late became the norm rather than the exception. One particularly grueling evening, I got home to find Mike lounging on the sofa, flipping through channels, the dinner table untouched and empty. "Where's dinner? You know I get hungry after work," he complained without even looking my way. I dropped my bag, my patience worn thin. "Mike, you know what's been going on at work. You were here first, why couldn't you have made something?" He laughed, a harsh, mocking sound that filled the room. "Me, cook dinner? That's women's work, Jenna. I'm not about to start playing house husband." I felt a surge of anger. We agreed, before we got married, there'd be no men's or women's jobs. "We're supposed to be in this together," I shot back, my voice rising. Mike's face darkened, and he stood up abruptly. "I don't have time for this nonsense," he snapped, grabbing his keys off the counter. "Where are you going?" I demanded, but he was already heading for the door. "Out. Away from this." He threw over his shoulder, and then he was gone. He disappeared for days. No calls, no texts, just silence. I was left alone, wrestling with my escalating workload and the crumbling facade of my marriage. When he finally came back, he acted as if nothing had happened, ignoring the strain and tension between us. Around that time, I received some good news at work. My efforts hadn't gone unnoticed, and I was promoted with a significant salary increase. I was over the moon, until I shared it with Mike. "That's great, babe," he said, a too quick smile flashing across his face. "Guess what? I'll quit in a week. No point in working now that you're making enough for both of us." I stared at him, stunned. "What? Mike, we need to discuss this together?" He shrugged, completely unconcerned. "You're making plenty. I can finally relax a bit." The next day, I went to work early, the weight of my thoughts heavier than ever. I stayed late again, my mind buzzing with figures and files, but also with a growing resolve. When I finally got home, Mike was waiting, his expression sour. "You're late again. Where's dinner?" he started in immediately. I took a deep breath, my decision clear in my mind. "Mike, we need to talk. This isn't working. I can't be the only one trying here." He scoffed, crossing his arms. "So what are you saying? You want a medal for working hard? Come off it, Jenna. No, I want a partner. Someone who stands with me, not on me, I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside. Mike looked at me, really looked, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of understanding. But then it was gone, replaced by the stubborn set of his jaw. If you can't handle this, maybe you shouldn't have taken that promotion, he retorted coldly. Then he grabbed his jacket and slammed the door behind him. 9 months had slipped by, months where I found myself trapped in a life I never envisioned. Mike never went back to work. Instead, he filled his days meeting with friends and often stumbled home late, reeking of booze. Each time I dared to question him, he'd explode in anger, retreating to the sanctity of his parents' home where he was still treated like a child rather than a grown man. You're being too hard on him, Jenna. You should be supporting your husband, not tearing him down. Nancy, his mother, would screech over the phone whenever he ran off to them. I'm supporting the whole family, Nancy. What more do you want from me? I'd shoot back, my patience worn to nothing. It wasn't just supporting Mike, his parents had grown dependent on me too. Small amounts of money were frequently requested, money for groceries, money for bills. It seemed their hands were always outstretched, waiting for me to fill them. Her only response was to hang up, leaving me fuming and helpless. One day, amidst this ongoing storm, I received a call that shattered the uneasy calm. Aunt Marie's voice was soft but strained as she relayed the news of Dad's passing. My world stopped. The last time we spoke, we had argued, silly things, youthful pride clashing with his rigid ways. I never got the chance to make peace. Can you come with me to the funeral? I asked Mike, a desperate plea for some semblance of support. He barely glanced up from the TV. Nah, I can't handle funerals. You go handle it, he muttered, dismissing my need with a wave of his hand. So, I went alone. The funeral was a blur, faces of family and friends I hadn't seen in years, all mourning the man who raised me alone. But it was after, while sitting in Dad's lawyer's office, that reality hit hard. Dad had left me everything, his house and savings, a total of $250,000. Tears streamed down my face as I realized, despite our differences, Dad had been preparing me for a future, perhaps knowing I'd need a way out someday. That night, in the quiet of my childhood home, I thumbed through old photo albums. Pictures of me in rebellious outfits, with bright hair and brighter smiles, all screamed of a girl who dreamed of freedom. I had traded those dreams for security, only to end up more caged than ever. As dawn broke, clarity came with it. It was time for a change, a big one. The money and the house, it wasn't just an inheritance, it was my ticket to a new life, a chance to rediscover the fierce girl who once believed she could conquer the world. I need to do this, not just for me, but for the woman Dad believed I could be, I whispered to myself, a vow in the still morning air. When I walked through the door of what used to be our shared home, the air was thick with expectation. Mike and his parents were already waiting, like vultures perched for the kill. Their eyes lit up with a mix of greed and curiosity as they spotted me. So, Jenna, how much did old Hal leave you? Mike asked, his voice dripping with feigned concern. I hesitated, clutching the documents a little tighter. Before I could reply, Mike snatched the papers right from my hands. As he scanned the figures, a triumphant grin spread across his face. $250,000, he exclaimed, turning to his parents, who immediately began to buzz with excitement. His mother, Nancy, clapped her hands together. Oh, that will cover a lovely vacation for us all. How about Italy? Or maybe a cruise? Frank was already nodding in agreement. And we need new furniture. Something nice, something grand, he chimed in. Mike, not to be outdone in the dreaming, banged his fist on the table. It's settled then. I'm getting a new car. It's about time I rode in style. I stood there, stunned into silence for a moment, as they carried on, planning as if I wasn't even in the room. Gathering my courage, I finally spoke up. Listen up, all of you. This is my inheritance, not yours. I decide how it's spent, not you, I said, my voice firm, louder than I felt. Mike whirled on me, his face twisted in anger. You think you're in charge here? Keep talking like that, and I'll divorce you so fast it'll make your head spin. His threat hung in the air, but before I could respond, Nancy grabbed me by the shoulders and shoved me towards the door. Think about how you're acting, Jenna. You're too arrogant. Maybe a night outside will cool you off, she hissed, her voice venomous. I stumbled out the door, the shock of the physical and emotional assault numbing my senses. For a moment, I stood there, bewildered by the audacity of their entitlement. But then, almost unexpectedly, a laugh bubbled up from within me. It started small, but grew in volume, echoing into the quiet street. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, a strange, exhilarating freedom. With nowhere else to go, I drove back to my father's house. The familiar walls welcomed me like an old friend. That night, the reality of my situation began to sink in, and a plan started to form. First thing in the morning, I picked up the phone and dialed my office. Hey, it's Jenna. I need to ask for a couple of weeks off, personal leave. I've got some things to sort out, I explained when my boss, Mr. Thompson, answered. Jenna, take all the time you need. I've noticed you've been off your game a bit lately. Whatever it is, sort it out. We'll manage here, Mr. Thompson replied, his voice kind and understanding. Thanks, Mr. T. I appreciate it more than you know, I said, grateful for his support. Hanging up, I felt the first real peace in a long while. The next steps were clear. I needed to legally separate myself and my finances from Mike and his parasitic hold on my life. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long time, I was ready to fight back. I was sipping coffee from Dad's favorite mug, enjoying the quiet of the morning, when my phone began to buzz relentlessly on the kitchen counter. At first, I ignored it, savoring the peace and the slight amusement at the thought that Mike and his parents were probably scheming about my inheritance. But the phone wouldn't stop, it was like it had a life of its own. Finally, I picked up, bracing myself for the onslaught. What is it, Mike? I snapped, not in the mood for niceties. Jenna, you need to give us access to the money. I can't get into the account. His voice was a mix of frustration and panic. I couldn't help but laugh, the sound sharp and clear. That's because I've restricted access, Mike. You can't use my money anymore, I said, enjoying the moment of revelation. There was a pause, a silence filled with his disbelief. You can't do that. We're married. Not for long, I replied curtly and hung up. That should have been the end of it, but of course, it wasn't. That evening, just as I was settling down with a book, I heard the familiar sound of a car pulling up outside. Mike and his parents came storming up to the front door, their faces twisted with anger and desperation. They didn't even wait for me to invite them in. Nancy pushed past the doorway, her voice shrill. You think you're clever, huh? Cutting us off like that. Frank followed, his brow furrowed. You're supposed to share what you have with your family. Mike was the last to enter, his expression one of betrayed fury. This is about us, Jenna. You're ruining everything. I stood my ground, feeling more secure in my decision than ever. This is not about us, Mike. This never was. It's always been about what you could get from me. His face contorted with anger. Well, guess what? We're getting a divorce. That's when I handed him the divorce papers, neatly prepared and waiting for this moment. The surprise on his face was almost comical. What's this? Your freedom, I said dryly. Sign them and you're free to leave. He scanned the documents quickly, a greedy spark lighting up his eyes as he signed. Fine. But remember, I get half, $125,000. That'll adjust our plans, but it's something. Nancy muttered under her breath. Should have been the full $250,000. Getting a piece of wool from a black sheep, aren't we? I couldn't hold back a laugh. Actually, you're getting nothing. Inheritance isn't divided in a divorce here. Not a cent of that money is yours. The color drained from their faces. Mike's hands shook as he realized the magnitude of his mistake. But we've already spent anticipating that money. We went on vacation, bought things on credit. His voice faded as the reality of their financial blunder hit him. Nancy's eyes were wide with fear, and Frank looked like he was about to collapse. "This isn't my problem. You made your choices," I said, my voice cold but steady. "Now, if you don't leave, I'll call the police." The threat was enough. They stumbled out, a mix of shock and anger marking their defeat. As the door closed behind them, a profound sense of relief washed over me. They were out of my life, finally and completely. Selling Dad's house was tough, like closing the final chapter of my old life. I felt every pang of regret as I handed over the keys, but I knew it was the right move. With that money, I bought a new place right next to my work, a cozy little house that was all mine, no strings attached. At work, things were looking up too. Mr. Thompson had been watching my progress closely, and one afternoon, he called me into his office. The sun streamed through the blinds, casting lines across his face as he looked up from his papers. "Jenna, you've been pulling in some impressive numbers, and your leadership hasn't gone unnoticed," he started, his tone serious but warm. I stood there, hands clasped in front of me, waiting. "I want to offer you the position of deputy director. You've earned it," he said, his eyes steady on mine. "Thank you, Mr. T. I won't let you down," I replied, a mix of pride and excitement swelling in my chest. It felt good, really good, to be recognized for my hard work and not just seen as a bank account or a maid. Meanwhile, Mike and his parents' situation had taken a nosedive. They were buried in debt after their reckless spending spree, hiding from creditors who weren't too pleased about unpaid bills. They had to sell their house, but even that wasn't enough to cover their debts. Last I heard, they were cramped in a small rented apartment, all of them working odd jobs, just to make ends meet. One evening, my phone rang, and Mike's name flashed on the screen. Curiosity got the better of me, and I answered. "Jenna, listen, I've been thinking a lot," he started, his voice shaky. "I made a mistake. A big one. I want to make things right. Maybe start over?" I couldn't help but laugh, not a joyful laugh, but one tinged with disbelief. "Start over? Mike, do you even hear yourself?" I know it sounds crazy, but I've changed, Jenna," he insisted, desperation clear in his voice. "Changed? Mike, you only call when you're out of money or options. You don't need a restart. You need a reality check," I shot back, my patience thin. And with that, I hung up. I realized then that I was truly free, not just from Mike, but from the hold his family had on me, from the life I was forced into. Now, I really understand what Dad tried to teach me all those years. He knew the value of standing on your own, of making tough decisions for the sake of your future. I only wish I could tell him he was right, share a moment of reconciliation. My name's Tasha, and let me tell you about how my world used to be before everything flipped upside down. Back when life was just Dad, Mom, and me, we lived in a big old house with more rooms than I bothered to count. It was peaceful, you know, the kind of place where laughter filled the halls, and there was always some sweet smell wafting from the kitchen. Mom was the heart of our home. She'd wake up singing, her voice floating up the stairs. "Tasha, rise and shine, sweetheart." I'd drag myself out of bed, grumbling like any teenager would, but her bright smile over pancakes made it worth it. Dad, he was the cool one. Always had a joke ready to lighten the mood or a story about his younger days. "When I was your age, I thought I could conquer the world with just a guitar and a bad haircut," he'd say, and we'd laugh, knowing he'd done just fine with a business suit and a level head instead. Life was good. More than good, actually, it was perfect. But as they say, all good things have a way of ending too soon. When Mom got sick, it was like our little paradise started to crumble. I remember the day she told us. We were sitting in the living room, the TV was on but no one was watching. "I have some tough news," she said, her voice steady, but her eyes betraying her fear. "Cancer." That word hit me like a ton of bricks. Dad reached for her hand, and they shared a look, a silent promise that they'd fight it together. The months that followed were rough. Hospitals, treatments, Mom losing her hair, but not her spirit. She'd joke about saving money on shampoo, trying to make it easier on us. But I saw the tears she thought she hid, heard the worry in Dad's whispers when he thought I was asleep. The day we lost her, everything changed. Dad and I, we tried to hold on to each other, to keep the pieces of our shattered family together. "We'll get through this, Tasha. We have to," Dad would say, his voice rough, the bags under his eyes getting darker each day. A year later, Dad brought someone new into our home. Victoria. She was like a whirlwind, sweeping in with her perfect hair and sharp clothes, taking over everything Mom had left behind. The first time I met her, she looked me up and down, a smirk playing on her lips as if she'd already figured me out. She walked around, touching Mom's things, rearranging the furniture. "George tells me you're quite the student. I'm sure you won't mind helping out more around here, now that I'm taking care of things." I remember feeling my fists clench at my sides. Help out? This was my home, not some boot camp she could run. But for Dad's sake, I bit my tongue. Sure, I can do more. Dad seemed to shrink a bit more each day, his laughter not as loud, his stories not as frequent. He was trying, though, for the sake of what he called moving forward. I wasn't so convinced. The new house was twice the size of our old one, and with that came twice the work. The first day we moved in, Victoria was already barking orders, her high heels clicking menacingly on the marble floor as she directed the movers. Once the movers left, she turned her gaze on me. "Tasha, I expect you to take care of your own space. I won't have time to clean up after you." I was leaning against the doorframe, watching her. "Got it," I muttered, already dreading the long list of chores I knew she'd pile on me. "And dinner should be ready by 6 each evening. I assume you can handle that?" There was a challenge in her voice, like she doubted I could boil water without burning it. As the days turned into weeks, the house felt less like home and more like a fancy prison. Dad was out a lot, trying to keep his business afloat, which left me alone with Victoria and her endless list of demands. "Tasha, the living room is dusty. Tasha, the silver isn't polished. Tasha, did you forget the dry cleaning?" It was relentless. One afternoon, Dad finally noticed how tense things had become. He found me in the garden, pulling weeds with more force than needed. "Hey, Tasha, you've been quiet lately. Everything okay?" I threw a clump of weeds into the bin, wiping sweat off my brow. "Just tired, Dad. This place is a lot to keep up with." He looked around, his expression growing thoughtful. "Yeah, it's a lot for anyone. Maybe I can talk to Victoria, see if we can hire some help." I almost laughed. "Good luck with that. She thinks I'm her personal maid." Dad's face hardened slightly, something I hadn't seen in a while. "That's not what I intended when we moved here. I'll handle it, Tasha. You shouldn't have to carry all this weight." But despite his good intentions, conversations with Victoria seemed to go in one ear and out the other. She'd nod, smile that tight-lipped smile of hers, and then it was back to business as usual. "Tasha, the hedges are overgrown. Tasha, the guest rooms need fresh linens." It was exhausting, trying to meet her standards. But it made me stubborn, too. I wasn't going to let her break me. I'd do the work, keep my head down, and count the days until I could leave for college. The thought of getting out, of finding my own space where no one could tell me how to mop a floor or when dinner should be on the table, that kept me going. But finally, the day came. I was off to a place where my stepmother's voice couldn't reach me, a city miles away where I could start fresh. I packed up early that morning, each suitcase feeling like a brick in the new foundation I was laying for myself. Dad came out to see me off, his face trying to smile, but I could tell he was torn up about it. "Tasha, are you sure you've got everything you need?" Dad asked, looking over the pile of bags and boxes. "And you'll call if you need anything? Remember, the money for your rent and books, it'll be in your account. Check it when you get there." "Dad, relax. I'll be fine. I'm just going to college, not Mars." I was trying to keep it light, to make this easier for him, but my own heart was hammering in my chest. The freedom of living alone was everything I thought it would be, and more. My apartment was small, but it was mine. No one to tell me to clean up, no one to report to, just my own space. My classes were tough, but I was tougher. I was determined to make the most out of this opportunity, studying hard and keeping my grades up. It wasn't long before I realized that living on a tight budget wasn't as easy as I'd thought it would be. Money was always on my mind. I didn't go out much, didn't see the point in blowing cash on parties when I had a goal in mind. Instead, I picked up a part-time job at a local cafe. It wasn't glamorous, but it was income, and every little bit helped. One evening, my coworker, Mike, caught me counting my tips for the third time. He leaned against the counter, a smirk on his face. "What, you trying to make those bills multiply by staring at them?" I rolled my eyes, shoving the cash into my wallet. "Just making sure I got everything. Budgeting isn't exactly a thrill." Mike laughed, pulling off his apron as he prepared to close up. "You know, you could ease up a bit. Come out with us tonight. We're just grabbing a drink to unwind." I hesitated. It was tempting, but sorry, I can't. Need to save every penny I earn. Maybe next time. I was here to build a future, one where I'd be financially stable enough to never have to rely on anyone, Victoria or otherwise. I wanted to save enough to buy Dad something nice, something to show him how much I appreciated everything he'd done for me. Just when I thought I had my life at college figured out, everything started to unravel. It began with a call that I never saw coming. Victoria was on the other line, her voice cool and detached as she delivered the news that would turn my world upside down. "Tasha, your father's hit a rough patch financially," she said without a hint of sympathy. "We're tightening belts around here, and, unfortunately, this means we can't send you money for your rent anymore." The line went dead before I could protest further. I was stunned, the reality of my situation slowly setting in. No more money meant no more apartment on my own, no more safety net. I had to act fast. I explained my situation to Jenny, my college friend and classmate. She was as kind-hearted as they come, always ready to lend a hand or an ear, whichever you needed more. "Tasha, that's awful. Look, why don't you move in with me? We could split the rent, and it'll be cheaper for both of us," she offered, while we were studying in the library. Moving in with Jenny was a breath of fresh air during a suffocating time. We shared costs, which made life somewhat more manageable, but just as I was adjusting to this new normal, another blow came 6 months later. Victoria messaged me on a social network this time. "No more money for tuition either. Your father's situation hasn't improved. You need to stand on your own now." Reading those words, I felt a mix of anger and despair. My savings were meager at best, eaten away by bills and necessities. I tightened my budget even further, cutting down on everything non-essential, especially food. Meals became smaller, more about sustenance than enjoyment, and my clothes started hanging looser on my frame. One evening, Jenny knocked on my door, her arms laden with grocery bags. She must have noticed my weight loss. "Hey, I picked up some extra stuff. Made too much dinner, too. You should come eat with us." I peeked out, seeing the warm light and smelling the food from the kitchen. My stomach growled, but I shook my head. "Thanks, Jen, but I can't. I need to save every penny. I've got to pay for tuition somehow." Jenny frowned, setting her jaw stubbornly. "Tasha, you need to eat. And you're not paying for this, okay? It's just leftovers." I wanted to argue, to maintain that thread of independence I was clinging to, but another growl from my stomach betrayed me. "Okay, maybe just a little. Thanks, Jen." As the semester wore on, I threw myself into my studies with even more fervor, if that was possible. The only way out of this financial mess was through scholarships, and I wasn't about to let anything jeopardize that. Jenny often tried to coax me into taking breaks, coming to parties, or just hanging out with friends. "Tasha, come on, you can't study all the time. Come out with us tonight." It'll be fun, and you need a break. I always had the same answer. I can't, Jen. I really need to ace these exams. But you're always working or studying. When do you ever relax? Jenny protested, her concern evident. Relaxing doesn't pay the bills, I replied curtly, my eyes never leaving my books. As the pressure mounted, my body began to feel the strain. Long hours at my jobs, followed by longer nights of studying, left me exhausted, running on fumes. But I couldn't stop, not when I was so close to earning that scholarship, not when my entire future was on the line. The shift at the diner had dragged on forever, and by the time I clocked out, the sun was already painting the sky with streaks of orange and pink. Exhausted didn't even begin to cover how I felt, but classes waited for no one, and I had a midterm to prepare for. Dragging my feet to my apartment, I planned to grab a quick shower and head straight to campus. However, as I reached for my keys, a wave of dizziness washed over me. The world spun wildly, and the ground seemed to rush up to meet me. The last thing I remembered was the cold pavement against my cheek, then darkness. I woke up with a start, the sterile smell of antiseptic flooding my senses. Blinking against the harsh fluorescent lights, I found myself in a hospital bed, and 4 drip attached to my arm, and Jenny sitting by my side, her expression a mix of relief and worry. Tasha, you're awake. God, you scared me. I found you passed out outside your apartment, Jenny said, her voice shaky. You collapsed, Tasha. The doctors said you're severely malnourished and dehydrated. You've been pushing yourself too hard. You need to rest. Rest was a luxury I couldn't afford. Not now. Not with everything hanging by a thread. But arguing felt like running a marathon, and I didn't have the energy. After a couple of days under observation, I was discharged with strict instructions to take it easy. Instructions that might as well have been written in sand for all the good they did. I headed straight home, my body weak, but my mind racing with all the things I needed to catch up on. Once home, I tried calling Dad. I needed to hear his voice, to tell him what happened. Maybe, just maybe, he could help. But the calls went straight to voicemail. Frustrated and feeling more alone than ever, I dialed Victoria's number next. She picked up on the 3rd ring. Yes? It's Tasha. I started, but the words tangled up, thick with emotions I couldn't control. Your father is out of the country. Business, she interrupted sharply. And before you ask, no, we can't help. You're on your own. Her words hit like a slap. But There's nothing more to discuss, Tasha. You're an adult. Handle it. The line went dead, leaving a ringing silence in its wake. I sat there, phone in hand, the weight of her dismissal crushing. It was then, in that quiet apartment, that the reality of my situation truly sank in. I was alone. Utterly and completely. Exams were creeping up, looming over me like dark clouds ready to burst. The stress was a tangible thing, wrapping its fingers around my throat, making it hard to breathe. To keep up with my studies, I had no choice but to let go of one of my jobs. Money, already a trickle, now felt like it had dried up to a few last drops. Sitting across from Jenny in the little diner we frequented, I fiddled with the edge of the menu, my stomach growling but my wallet painfully thin. Stop looking at the prices, Tasha. I've got this, okay? Jenny said, her voice firm but gentle. She was trying to be supportive, but accepting help never got easier. I'll pay you back. Every cent, I muttered, feeling the weight of each word. Jenny rolled her eyes, a smile tugging at her lips. Yeah, I know. Just order something hearty, alright? You look like you could use it. Reluctantly, I ordered the cheapest meal, my pride aching with every word. But Jenny was right, I needed the energy, especially now. As the exams rolled in, one after the other, I poured everything I had into them. Nights blurred into days, textbooks and notes scattered around me like a fortress. When the results came in, I couldn't believe my eyes, straight A's. A tuition bonus followed, a small but significant light at the end of a very dark tunnel. I should have been over the moon, but all I could do was collapse into bed, my body and mind shutting down from sheer exhaustion. I slept for days, missing calls and messages, the world moving on without me. One night, wrapped in the solitude of my small apartment, I dreamt of Mom. She was in our old kitchen, humming a tune, her smile warm and inviting. "Tasha, come here, sweetheart," she called, her voice a soft echo of better days. In my dream, I went to her, basking in the feeling of being home, being safe. But as dreams do, it ended, and I woke up in tears, the ache in my chest raw and fierce. The emptiness of the apartment was suffocating, and a desperate need to connect with her overwhelmed me. I made a decision then, one that felt like grasping at straws but necessary. I would go back to my hometown, visit her grave, and maybe, just maybe, find some of that peace I saw in my dream. Checking my bank account, I calculated what I could afford, a cheap bus ticket, the cheapest I could find. Work could do without me for a couple of days, I wasn't much use to them or anyone else in my current state anyway. "Jen, I'm going home for a couple of days," I told her over the phone, my voice more steady than I felt. "Home?" There was a pause, and I could picture her brow furrowing in concern. "Are you sure that's a good idea?" "Okay, but call me, alright?" "Anytime, day or night. Promise?" "Promise," I said, feeling a thread of warmth at her concern. The journey back was a blur, my thoughts a tangled mess of memories and what-ifs. As the bus rolled into the familiar streets of my hometown, a mixture of dread and longing settled in my stomach. It was supposed to be a simple visit, a moment to feel close to Mom again, but as I walked among the familiar gravestones, a figure in the distance caught my eye. My heart skipped, tall, with a familiar stoop of the shoulders, kneeling by a grave. My pace quickened, disbelief and hope churning within me. "Dad?" My voice was tentative, almost afraid to shatter the fragile moment. The figure turned, and our eyes met. There was a flicker of confusion, then recognition, and something that looked a lot like sorrow. "Tasha?" His voice broke, raw with emotion. It had been so long. I ran to him, no longer caring about the cold or the tears that had started to spill over. "Dad, what are you doing here?" He rose quickly, nearly stumbling in his haste, and enveloped me in his arms. I was suddenly 5 years old again, safe and cherished. I had a dream about your mother," he confessed, pulling back just enough to see my face. "She told me to come here today." I gasped, the parallel too stark to ignore. I had a dream about her, too. That's why I'm here. Dad wiped away my tears with an old handkerchief, rough and a bit frayed. "Seems like she's still looking out for us, huh?" "Yeah, seems like it," I agreed, laughter mingling with my tears. "We should talk, Tasha. Come back to the house with me," Dad suggested, his tone hopeful yet cautious. I hesitated, images of Victoria's cold stares flashing through my mind. "Are you sure? What about Victoria?" "She'll manage. You're my daughter, and we have a lot to catch up on." His voice held a firmness I hadn't heard in a long time. The ride to the house was filled with an awkward yet comforting silence. When we arrived, Victoria was in the front yard, pruning roses with sharp snips that seemed to echo her mood. "Tasha? What are you doing here?" She stood up straight, her eyes narrowing as she took in my presence. I stepped forward, bolstered by Dad's presence. "I came to see Dad. We have some things to talk about." Dad nodded at Victoria. "Why don't you make us some dinner? We'll be inside." Her mouth tightened, but she nodded stiffly and headed inside. Dad led me into the living room, a space that once felt warm but now seemed curated for appearance rather than comfort. The tension in the dining room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Victoria, looking paler than usual, was fussing about leaving the house on some urgent errand, but Dad's voice stopped her cold. "Sit down, we're not done here." Reluctantly, Victoria sat, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. Dad turned his attention to me, his brow furrowed in concern. "Tasha, you've lost so much weight. Are you on some sort of diet?" I shook my head, a bitter laugh escaping me. "Diet? Hardly. It's not choice, Dad, it's necessity. I've been struggling to make ends meet because I've been paying for my tuition and all my living expenses by myself. His confusion was apparent. What are you talking about? I've been sending $3,000 every month to cover your expenses. It's been sent to your account on the 15th every month without fail. I stared at him, stunned. What? Dad, I haven't seen a dime of that money for the last 2 years. I've been working 2 jobs just to pay my bills and tuition. The color drained from Dad's face as he turned to Victoria. Is this true? Where's the money, Victoria? Victoria stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. I needed it. It wasn't supposed to be permanent. Dad's voice was a low growl. Tell me everything, now. She hesitated, then spilled the beans. I got involved in a financial pyramid scheme. I thought I could make a quick buck, turn around our financial woes, but I ended up in debt. The people I dealt with, they're not the kind you say no to. I used Tasha's money to pay them off. I thought I could replace it before anyone noticed. Dad's hands were shaking. You endangered my daughter's health, her education, over a get-rich-quick scam? And you hid this from me? I didn't know what to do, Victoria whimpered, her usual composure shattered. You're going to leave. Tonight, Dad said firmly, standing up. And we're done here. I want a divorce. After Victoria hurriedly packed some belongings and left, Dad turned to me, his eyes filled with sorrow. Tasha, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. From now on, I'll handle your finances directly. No more middlemen. I managed a small smile. Actually, Dad, I got a scholarship recently. Tuition's covered. His eyes lit up, pride overtaking the anger. That's my girl. Always making me proud. But you deserve a break. How about a vacation? A real one, by the sea. You've earned it. The vacation was like a dream. Blue skies, golden beaches, and the soothing sound of waves. It was a chance to recharge, to put the struggles and pain behind me. I returned with a renewed vigor, ready to tackle my studies with fresh enthusiasm. Now, back at school, I still worked part-time, not out of necessity, but to save up for something special, a gift for Dad, a thank you for everything. Despite the hardships, the challenges, I found myself attending the occasional party with friends, allowing myself to enjoy life, not just endure it. I see you're going out more, Jenny noted one evening as I dressed up. Yeah, trying to find a balance. I guess I'm learning it's okay to have a little fun, I replied, adjusting my earrings. Just don't forget about us when you're famous, she joked, throwing a cushion at me. I won't. Could never. I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in years. As I looked at myself in the mirror, I saw a reflection of someone who'd been through a storm and emerged stronger. I was still careful with money, some habits are hard to shake, but now it was not out of desperation, but out of a desire to build a future I chose. A future that was finally looking bright. My name is Lillian Carter. I own Carter Colors, a company that's made a big splash in the world of art supplies. I've worked my butt off to get where I am, and at 35, I felt like I was on top of the world. It was at a trade show in New York where my life took a turn that I hadn't seen coming. Walking through the crowded venue, I could hear the buzz about the latest trends in art materials. That's where I bumped into Ethan Gray. You could say he was famous, or more like infamous, in the art circles. His paintings sold for thousands, and his personal life filled just as many gossip columns. Lillian Carter, right? Ethan's voice cut through the noise as he approached my booth, his eyes scanning the vibrant display of aerosol paints. That's me, I replied, extending a hand. And you're Ethan Gray. Seen your work, heard a lot more. He flashed a grin, his gaze still lingering on the cans. We ended up talking over drinks after the show. Ethan was charming, no doubt about it, and he knew how to make a girl feel like she was the only one in the room. So, Lillian, how'd you get into this gig? Ethan asked, swirling his drink. Started in my garage. Just me, some paint, and too many ideas. Now it's this, I said, spreading my arms wide. What about you? Always a painter? Kind of fell into it, he shrugged. But let's talk more about you. Your stuff's everywhere. Bet you're killing it. The conversation flowed as easily as the drinks, and by the end of the night, I was pretty taken with him. Ethan wasn't just interested in my business, he seemed genuinely into me. It was refreshing, considering most men were either intimidated or just wanted to talk shop. A few months flew by, and Ethan was everywhere I was. Art shows, gallery openings, you name it. He always made sure he was seen with me, and I won't lie, I liked the attention. One evening, as we closed down a particularly successful gallery event, Ethan pulled me aside. The room was buzzing with the last few art enthusiasts, but he had that look in his eyes that said he needed to talk. Lillian, these past months with you have been incredible, he started, his voice low. You're amazing, you know that? I blushed, feeling a mix of excitement and nerves. Thanks, Ethan. I've enjoyed it too. A lot. He took a deep breath, his hand finding mine. I don't want to just date, Lillian. I'm in this. All in. What do you say? The question caught me off guard. Here was a man who'd been the talk of the town, known for his fleeting romances, and he was looking at me like I was his next masterpiece. I say, let's do it, I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. That night, Ethan asked me to marry him in a way that was both shocking and utterly perfect. It wasn't long before we were planning a wedding that was bound to be as colorful as my paints. After our whirlwind wedding, which was the talk of the town, Ethan and I moved into a spacious new house that I had picked out, imagining kids running around, their laughter filling up the halls. It was a big step, buying that place, but I felt it was right. It felt like our future was starting to take shape right before my eyes. To sweeten our new beginning, I surprised Ethan with a sleek new car. For all the times you'll drive back from your studio, all inspired and messy, I joked as I handed him the keys. He laughed, hugged me tight, and said it was more than he deserved. I got one for myself too, so I guess we both deserve the best, I shot back with a grin. Ethan continued working out of his old studio across town, despite my suggestions to set one up at home. Babe, I'm a creature of habit. That old studio, it's got the vibes, the history. Can't just leave that behind, he'd explain every time I brought it up. I didn't push it, I respected his space and his process. Plus, I was busy too, launching a new store downtown, expanding Carter Colors. One evening, as we were relaxing on our back porch, Ethan brought up a new project he was dreaming about. Lil, I've got this idea, something big. But I'm a bit strapped right now, he said, looking out into the yard, his voice unusually hesitant. What kind of big? I asked, intrigued. A new series of paintings. Different from anything I've done before. I want to experiment, push boundaries, he explained, his eyes lighting up as he spoke. That sounds amazing, Ethan. So, what's holding you back? I leaned in, always excited to see him passionate about his work. Funds, babe. It's a costly venture, and I'm a bit tight financially. I need $100,000, he admitted, scratching the back of his head. Without a second thought, I replied, why didn't you just say so? Let's finance it. Lillian, you are incredible. Seriously, the most generous woman in the world, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I brushed off his praise with a wave of my hand. Stop it. Just go make those masterpieces. The money went into his account, and soon after, Ethan's project kicked off. We'd go to his exhibitions together, and it was hard not to feel proud as I watched him talk about his art, the crowds hanging on his every word. I felt like we were a power couple, making our marks in our respective fields. One night, after an especially successful opening, we celebrated over dinner. You see, Lil, this is all because of you. You inspire me, Ethan said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. Nah, it's all you, babe. I just provided the canvas, you're the one making the magic happen, I replied, squeezing back. But seriously, I don't know what I'd do without you, he continued, his gaze intense. Let's not find out, okay? I joked, trying to keep the mood light. As we clinked glasses, I felt like everything was falling into place. The night of Ethan's birthday was supposed to be perfect. I had everything planned down to the last detail: dinner at one of the city's most exclusive restaurants, followed by a helicopter ride over the glittering skyline. I wore my favorite red dress, the one Ethan said made me look like $1,000,000. I arrived early, a bundle of nerves and excitement. The maitre d' showed me to our table, a secluded spot with a view of the city lights. I ordered a glass of wine and waited, my heart pounding with anticipation. Half an hour late, Ethan finally walked in, but not alone. My heart sank as I saw him enter with a young woman on his arm, laughing at something he'd said. My stomach churned as they approached the table. "Lillian, I need to talk to you," Ethan said, his voice serious all of a sudden. I looked from him to the woman, my eyes wide. "This better be good, Ethan. Who's this?" "This is Lana," he introduced her, and she gave me a small, almost mocking wave. "Look, Lillian, I'll be straight with you. I've fallen for Lana. We're in love, and I'm going to marry her." His words hit like a punch to the gut. Lana, standing a bit too close to Ethan, looked at me with a smirk. "Sorry you had to find out this way," she said, her tone anything but apologetic. Ethan handed me an envelope. "I've filed for divorce. And I'll need half of everything we acquired together." I stared at the papers in my hands, my whole body shaking. I felt numb, unable to fully grasp the betrayal. The love and life I thought we were building crumbled before my eyes. As they turned to leave, Lana glanced back and waved at me with a malicious smile. The sight of it filled me with a cold rage. But I just sat there, silent, watching them walk away. After they left, I downed my wine in one gulp and dialed Laura, my best friend. She picked up on the first ring. "Laura, it's me. Can I come over? It's Ethan, he's leaving me. For another woman." "Oh, Lil, I'm so sorry. Come right over, honey. We'll figure this out." I left the restaurant and headed straight to Laura's. The drive over was a blur, my mind racing and heartbreaking. When I arrived, Laura was waiting at the door, her face full of concern. Inside, we sat on the couch, and I poured out the whole sordid story. Laura listened, her face growing angrier by the minute. "He wants what? Half of everything? That no good, two timing." "Yeah, the house, the cars, even the new store," I said, my voice hollow. "I bought all that thinking we were building a future. We need to fight back, Lillian. This is outright theft." Laura's outrage mirrored my own. "Let's find someone who can dig up dirt on him. If he's been planning this, who knows what else he's hiding." That night, I slept at Laura's place, my dreams a chaotic swirl of betrayal and whispered plans of revenge. The fight was just beginning, and I was ready to claim what was rightfully mine. The next morning, we were running on adrenaline and caffeine, ready to set our plan into motion. We found a private detective named Hank through a recommendation, and we wasted no time meeting him to discuss our situation. "Morning, ladies. What brings you to my part of town?" Hank asked, his office cluttered with files and old coffee cups. "Morning, Hank. We've got a bit of a situation. My soon-to-be ex-husband, he's pulled a fast one on me," I began, trying to keep my voice steady. Laura jumped in, her voice firm. "We need dirt, Hank. The kind that sticks. This guy's been playing my friend here for a fool, and we're not about to let him get away with it." "Got it. Names, places, any details you've got. I'll start digging." Hank's fingers flew over his keyboard as we provided him with everything he needed. Over the next week, Laura and I were on edge, waiting for any news. Finally, Hank called us back to his office, with a grim look on his face. "Found more than I bargained for," he said, handing us a thick file. "Your guy, he's been seeing this mistress of his for months. Fancy trips, expensive gifts, and yeah, that new apartment on the coast? It's in his name, bought with your money." The betrayal stung anew, but now it was mixed with a fiery anger. "Can we make this public? I mean, legally?" I asked, thumbing through the documents. Laura, ever the strategist, had another idea. Wait, my cousin's a producer for that morning talk show, Daybreak Delights. What if Lillian goes public there? A live tell-all? Perfect. Let's burn his little castle down with the truth, I agreed, feeling a surge of empowerment. We arranged for me to appear on the show. The night before, I was a bundle of nerves, but Laura stayed on the phone with me, rehearsing what I would say. The morning of the show, I sat across from the host, a sympathetic woman named Marcy. Today, we have Lillian Carter, who's here to share a troubling personal story involving deception and betrayal. Lillian? Taking a deep breath, I looked into the camera. Thank you, Marcy. Yes, I'm here because I believe in standing up against deceit. My husband, whom I trusted with my heart and my finances, has been living a double life. With my money, he funded his affairs and lied about his business ventures. The host interjected, "And you have proof of these claims?" I nodded, passing over the documents Hank had compiled. Receipts, bank statements, even property deeds. All funded through the money I gave him, believing in his integrity. The response was immediate. Viewers began commenting, the phone started ringing, and by the end of the day, I had messages from several of Ethan's ex-wives. They shared similar stories of deception and theft. Bolstered by public support, I filed a lawsuit against Ethan for fraud. The case quickly became a local sensation, with more and more people coming forward with their own encounters with Ethan's duplicity. After the initial bombshell on Daybreak Delights, the story of Ethan's duplicity spread like wildfire. Other women, once silenced by fear and shame, now stepped forward, eager to share their stories on the very platform that had emboldened them. The talk show's producers, sensing the depth and reach of the story, organized a special segment. It wasn't just about me or Ethan, it was about a pattern, a repeated betrayal that spanned years and victims. I stood backstage, listening to the quiet murmur of the other women gathering, their voices a mix of nervousness and resolve. Lillian, you ready for this? Laura asked, her hand reassuring on my shoulder. As I'll ever be, I replied, taking a deep breath. It's not just my fight anymore. We walked onto the set, a chorus of applause greeting us. Marcy, the host, welcomed each of us with a warmth that eased some of the tension from our shoulders. Ladies, thank you for being here today, Marcy started, her voice serious, her eyes sweeping across the group. What you're doing is incredibly brave. Lillian, can you introduce us to these courageous women? With a nod, I turned slightly to address the audience, both in the studio and beyond the cameras. These women, like me, were charmed by a man we thought we knew. But behind the love and promises were lies that cost us more than just broken hearts. They cost us our trust, our security. One by one, the women shared their tales. The pattern was starkly similar: whirlwind romances, quick commitments, and then the slow, painful realization of being used. He told me he needed money for a new gallery, one woman said, her voice faltering. I sold my late mother's jewelry to help him. And then he vanished. Another spoke up, her anger palpable. He said he was investing in our future, but he was funding his lavish trips with his mistresses. The trial that followed was a media spectacle. Ethan, with his slick lawyers and smoother talk, tried to paint himself as the misunderstood artist, but the evidence was overwhelming. The judge ruled in our favor, recognizing the systematic deception Ethan had woven into our lives. The court finds the defendant guilty of fraud and orders restitution to the victims, the judge declared, her gavel a satisfying sound in the heavy silence that followed. However, the aftermath was as surprising as the ordeal itself. Ethan's notoriety, rather than crippling his career, seemed to enhance it. His art, now more infamous than ever, skyrocketed in value. The scandal, it seemed, was a perverse sort of publicity. Months after the trial, Ethan's voice unexpectedly filled my living room, his laughter ringing through the phone in a call I never expected to receive. Lillian, darling, I must thank you, he sneered, his voice oozing false sweetness. What are you talking about, Ethan? I replied, my grip tightening around the phone. Oh, come now. Thanks to your little stunt, my paintings are selling at triple the price. Scandal really does wonders for the art world, he boasted, arrogance dripping from every word. I was silent, processing his audacity. And to top it off, he continued, the smirk practically audible. I've married again. A young, beautiful thing. Far superior to you in every way. His words were meant to wound, and they did, momentarily. But as he laughed and hung up, a fire built inside me. Hank called on time at a time when I was considering new ways to get back at Ethan. Lillian, you're gonna want to sit down for this. Hank's voice was thick with urgency. What's up, Hank? What did you find now? My heart skipped a beat, wondering what bombshell was left to drop. It's big, Lil. I mean, career-ending big for Ethan. Meet me as soon as you can, he said. I agreed, curiosity and a twinge of that old, familiar rage stirring in my belly. At Hank's office, the evidence laid out was undeniable, shocking even to me, seasoned by now in Ethan's capacity for deceit. But this was different. This was massive. Armed with the new information, I couldn't just walk away. Not when justice was screaming to be served one final time. The opportunity came sooner than expected. Ethan was being celebrated at a high-profile art exhibition. Politicians, business moguls, the who's who of society would be there. And so, I decided, would I, with a +1 whose identity would shake the very foundations of Ethan's pretentious little empire. The night of the exhibition, I was a bundle of nerves and resolve. Beside me was Alex, a shy, young artist with a brilliant talent and a significant role in the night's unfolding drama. As we entered, Ethan, ever the charmer, was surrounded by admirers, his new wife, Lana, glittering beside him. Ethan's eyes narrowed the moment he saw me, his smile faltering as he noticed Alex. His discomfort was palpable, and he looked like he'd seen a ghost. As the speeches began, I felt every heartbeat, every tick of the clock acutely. When it came time for Ethan to speak about his original works, I knew it was showtime. Excuse me, can I have a moment? I stepped forward, microphone in hand, my voice steady. The room fell silent, all eyes on me. Thank you, I began, smiling sweetly at the confused faces around me. I know you're all here to honor Ethan, but I want to introduce you to someone very special. Alex, come up here. Alex joined me, his nervousness clear but his resolve strong. I nodded at him, and he began the slideshow he'd prepared. The first slide displayed a familiar painting, one Ethan claimed as his own. Lovely, isn't it? I continued, as slide after slide showed beautiful artworks. All created by Alex here, not by Ethan. The revelation that Ethan Gray had no original talent and had been passing off someone else's art as his own hit the crowd like a tidal wave. The grand hall, once filled with the murmur of admiration, was now abuzz with shock and indignation. Alex stood beside me, his presence calm yet powerful against the storm of reactions. His admission on the stage, backed by undeniable evidence of contracts and payments, mere crumbs compared to the fortunes Ethan had made, was the final nail in the coffin of Ethan's career. I was hired by Ethan years ago, Alex's voice echoed in the hall, now hushed to catch every word. He promised exposure and mentorship, but all I got was a corner in a studio and secrecy, while he sold my work as his own for huge profits. The guests, many of whom were prominent figures in the art world, looked at Ethan with a mix of disbelief and disdain. His shoulders slumped, his usual charm dissipated into the air, leaving behind the shell of a man exposed by his own greed and deceit. One furious collector stood up, his voice booming across the room. You sold me a lie. I demand a refund, Ethan. How could you? His outcry was a catalyst. More voices rose in agreement, demanding justice for the deception they had unknowingly supported. Lana, who had been standing by him in what she assumed was her moment of social ascent, now recoiled as if struck. I didn't sign up to marry a fraud, she yelled, her voice shrill. We're done, Ethan. She stormed out, her exit as dramatic as the scandal unfolding. Reporters, quick to sense the magnitude of the scandal, began furiously taking notes, their cameras flashing. The air was electric, charged with the thrill of downfall and the drama of truth unveiled. Seeing an opportunity not just for vengeance, but for rightful recognition, I stepped forward once more, seizing the moment to turn the tide. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice clear and commanding over the noise. "Tonight has been a revelation not just of deceit but of true talent. This young man, Alex Mercer, is the real artist behind the paintings you've admired tonight." The room quieted, eyes turning to Alex, who stood a little taller under the gaze of the art world's elite. As his agent, I'm proud to present his genuine work, not just for sale, but for the recognition he rightfully deserves. We welcome galleries, collectors, and art lovers to support true talent, unshadowed by deceit. The shift in the room was palpable. Curiosity replaced shock, and several gallery owners and art dealers approached us, their expressions one of intrigue and respect. "Mr. Mercer, could we discuss potential exhibitions?" one gallery owner asked, her tone eager and genuine. "Absolutely," I replied, smiling at Alex, who was finally receiving the recognition he deserved. As the crowd began to buzz with positive murmurs and discussions of potential deals, I looked over at Ethan, now a bystander in his own downfall. His empire, built on lies and exploitation, had crumbled. 4 years had flown by since that explosive night at the exhibition. Life, it seemed, had settled into a rhythm more beautiful and fulfilling than I ever could have imagined. Alex and I, now not just partners in business but in life, had woven our paths together. The morning light filtered through our bedroom window, casting playful shadows on the wall. Alex, already awake, was sketching by the window, his fingers moving deftly over the paper. Our little boy, Max, was already sitting at the table, munching on his breakfast. "Mommy, look." Max held up his crayon masterpiece, color sprawling across the page in wild abandon. "That's amazing, buddy. You're gonna be just like Alex," I said, ruffling his hair. Alex joined us, placing a kiss on my head and then on Max's. "He's got your creativity, Lillian. We might have a little artist on our hands." Life had indeed been kind, but it wasn't just our family flourishing. Alex's career as an artist had skyrocketed, his genuine talent now recognized and celebrated far and wide. And me, stepping into the role of his agent, I found a passion for advocating and nurturing real talent, something that gave me a deep sense of fulfillment. As we sat at the breakfast table, the phone rang. I answered, still smiling from our morning banter. "Lillian Carter," I greeted. "Lillian, it's Diane from Galleria Moderna. We just wanted to confirm Alex's solo exhibit next month. We're expecting a massive turnout." "That's fantastic, Diane. We're all set on our end. Alex has some incredible pieces ready to go," I replied, my heart swelling with pride. After the call, I looked over at Alex, who was now helping Max with his crayon choices. "Another packed house expected, Mr. Mercer. Seems you're the man of the hour, yet again." Alex chuckled, wrapping an arm around me. "Only because I have an amazing agent. And the best family a guy could ask for." Our lives were a stark contrast to the chaos that had engulfed Ethan. Plagued by lawsuits from galleries, museums, and private collectors, his world had crumbled. The last we heard, he had fled the country, a broken man chased away by the weight of his own deceit. The scandal that once threatened to stain my life had instead cleared the path to this new beginning. I had not only found success in business, but had found love and built a family on foundations of trust and genuine support. My name's Lana, just a regular girl who ended up pouring drinks at Joe's bar downtown after high school. It wasn't anything fancy, but it paid the bills and kept me busy. That's where I first laid eyes on Daniel. It was a Thursday night, the kind where the bar was buzzing but not too packed, just how I like it. In walked this guy, Daniel, with a few of his buddies. Right off, he stuck out. Not because he was loud or anything, he was the calm kind, the kind that had an easy smile and a look in his eyes that said he knew something you didn't. He sauntered over to the bar and took a seat right in front of where I was working. "Hey," he said, flashing that grin. "What's good here, besides the view?" I shot him a look. Beer's cold, if that's what you mean, I replied, not letting on that I caught his cheeky compliment. His laugh was genuine, and it made me smile despite myself. I'll take one then, and whatever you recommend for yourself. Let's make it two, he added. Pouring the drinks, I couldn't help but notice the way he watched me, not in a creepy way, but like he was actually interested in what I was doing. So, you come here often? I joked as I handed him the beers. First time, actually. My friend said this place has the best service in town. Guess they were right, Daniel said, his eyes not leaving mine. We chatted more than I usually did with customers. He told me about his college days, all fancy and full of big words I didn't bother to remember. And I told him about growing up here in town, how I always thought I'd do something more but never figured out what that more was. You're interesting, Lana, he said out of the blue. Not like the usual crowd in here. I raised an eyebrow. Thanks, I guess. You're not too bad yourself, for a rich boy. He laughed again, that sound that filled up the space around us. Rich boy, huh? Trust me, having money's not all it's cracked up to be. We got interrupted then by his friends, who were ready to move on to some club or another. He stood up, tossed a 50 on the bar, way too much for 2 beers, and winked. Maybe I'll find that right company if I come back here. And just like that, he was gone, melting into the crowd with his friends. But something about him lingered, like the echo of his laugh in my ears, making me wonder if I'd see him again. Daniel started showing up at the bar every single night after that first encounter. At first, I figured he was just like any other guy, killing time with a beer and small talk. But then, the talks got longer and a whole lot more personal. He'd settle into his usual spot, and as I wiped down the counter or restocked the shelves, he'd tell me bits and pieces about his life, his family. My dad's pretty big into politics, he'd say with a casual shrug, like he was talking about the weather, not dropping that his father was one of the state's top politicians. And Mom, well, she's a housewife, keeps everything running smooth at home. The more we talked, the more I saw past the polished surface. Sure, he had money and a name that opened doors, but there was something else, something real that I couldn't quite put my finger on. And despite my better judgment, I found myself looking forward to those evenings when he'd show up. One night, it all changed. He came in looking serious, his usual smile nowhere in sight. Lana, I've been thinking, he started, hesitating a bit. How about we go out tomorrow? Somewhere nice, not just here. It was sudden, but not unwelcome. Like a date? I asked, trying to sound cool but feeling my heart thump a little harder. Yeah, a date, he confirmed, his smile back as if he'd won some sort of victory seeing my reaction. That date led to another and another. Before I knew it, we were seeing each other every day. Daniel talked about his life, and I shared mine. He'd laugh off the differences, saying, "Wealth's my only drawback, you know." But it wasn't just his wealth. Daniel loved the high life, parties, late nights, the kind of leisure I could hardly imagine. He brushed off my concerns with a wave. Things will change, Lana. You'll see. Then came the night he wanted me to meet his parents. I was a bundle of nerves. We drove up to their mansion, the kind of place you see in movies, with sprawling gardens and more rooms than you'd know what to do with. His mother, Mrs. Patricia Gilmore, was as chilly as the marble floors, sizing me up like I was something she found stuck to her shoe. A waitress, she said, her voice dripping with disdain. Really, Daniel, you expect her to fit into our world? His father, Gerald Gilmore, however, beamed at me as if I was the first honest thing he'd seen in years. Lana, dear, it's refreshing to see someone from real life. You're just what we need. A bridge to the common man, right before the elections. I didn't know whether to be flattered or offended. The dinner was tense, Mrs. Gilmore sniping comments under her breath, Mr. Gilmore countering with grand declarations about my refreshing simplicity. At one point, Mrs. Gilmore had enough, standing up so fast her chair almost toppled over. "I will not stand for this," she hissed, storming out of the room. Mr. Gilmore just winked at me across the table. Don't you worry, Lana. Everything will be just fine. That wink was supposed to reassure me, but it felt like I was being swept into a game I didn't know how to play. Weeks later, Daniel got down on one knee, right there in the bar where we first met, with the same cheeky grin he had that first night. "Marry me, Lana, and let's show them all how it's done," he said. And I, lost in the moment and in him, said yes. The wedding was anything but the quiet affair I'd hoped for. From the moment Daniel popped the question, his father took over the whole show. He insisted on a grand ceremony, one that would be talked about far and wide. "It'll be perfect for the campaign," he'd say with a sly grin, every time I brought up keeping things small. So, there I was, standing in a dress fancier than anything I'd ever owned, with cameras flashing in my face as I tried to keep my smile from faltering. The reporters swarmed around us, and Mr. Gilmore relished every moment, playing the gracious father-in-law to perfection. "See, folks, this is what real love looks like. Unity across different worlds," he announced to the cameras, slinging his arm around me a little too tightly. I glanced over at my parents, sitting off to the side, their expressions a mix of awe and discomfort. They weren't used to this kind of spectacle, and frankly, neither was I. Mrs. Gilmore, decked out in a dress that probably cost more than my dad's car, pasted on a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She leaned in during the photo op, whispering through clenched teeth, "Smile, Lana. Today, we're all family." After the spectacle, Daniel and I moved into a luxury apartment, a stark contrast to my modest childhood home. It was a wedding gift from his parents, lavish and sprawling, located in one of the city's most exclusive buildings. Daniel's nights out with his friends became more frequent, and I found myself alone in our expansive living space more often than not. His mother, Mrs. Gilmore, took it upon herself to drop by unannounced, always with a critique ready at her lips. One such afternoon, she found me trying to straighten up the mess from one of Daniel's late-night gatherings. She surveyed the room with a disdainful eye before fixing her gaze on me. "Lana, this isn't some roadside diner. You need to keep a better eye on Daniel. Look at him, he's out all the time, drinking, and it's your job to rein him in." I bristled at her words, my hands clenching the dishcloth tighter. "And what exactly do you suggest I do, Mrs. Gilmore? Chain him to a chair?" Her lips thinned into a line. "Don't be smart, Lana. You need to take control. Otherwise, you're just as much to blame." The air was tense between us, the only sounds the soft tick of the expensive clock on the wall and the distant hum of city life outside the windows. That night, when Daniel came home, I tried to talk to him about it. "Your mom thinks I'm not doing enough to keep you in line," I said, trying to keep my voice even. Daniel's reaction was immediate and heated. "You gonna listen to her? Let's not let her get between us, okay? I love you, Lana. We'll figure this out together." But as the weeks rolled on, nothing changed. Daniel's assurances felt more and more hollow, and I found myself questioning whether love was enough to bridge the chasm that seemed to be widening between us. Living the high life wasn't all it was cracked up to be, not by a long shot. I found myself constantly tidying our massive apartment, cooking meals that often went cold before Daniel got home, and hustling laundry to and from the cleaners, all while holding down my shifts at Joe's bar. Meanwhile, Daniel, with no job on his horizon, seemed content to blow through his hefty allowance on nights out with his friends. Daniel's mother, the queen of high society gossip, made sure everyone knew her twisted version of our life. According to her, I was the villain, a dumb, greedy woman who led her poor son astray with my low-class ways. It was a normal day at the bar when she decided to bring her highfalutin friends for a casual lunch. The moment they strutted in, I knew I was in for it. They perched at the bar, their noses turned up like they smelled something foul. Mrs. Gilmore waved me over with a flick of her wrist, her voice loud enough to turn a few heads. "Lana, darling, could you hurry up? We don't have all day, and we expect proper service even in this establishment." Her friends snickered, their eyes scanning the bar with barely disguised contempt. I forced a smile, taking their orders while my hands itched to dump a tray of drinks right into their laps. "Make sure the glasses are clean, dear. We wouldn't want to catch anything. one of her cronies quipped, her laughter sharp as shattered glass. "Yes, ma'am," I replied, my tone syrupy sweet. I delivered their drinks and food with a smile plastered on, though inside I felt anything but cheerful. As I passed by with another order, Mrs. Gilmore grabbed my arm, her grip tight. "You know, Lana, it's a shame you don't use your husband's money to better yourself. Maybe some classes in etiquette? Or a seminar on how to be a supportive wife?" I pulled away gently, keeping my voice steady. "I appreciate the advice, Mrs. Gilmore. I'll give it all the consideration it deserves." The bar couldn't close fast enough that day. Each comment, each condescending look from that table, added weight to the growing dread that this was my life now, scrutinized and scorned, no matter how hard I tried. Back at our apartment, the silence was a stark contrast to the chaos at the bar. Daniel was out again, the note on the fridge a weak apology for missing dinner. I was left alone with my thoughts, which were as cluttered as the untouched plates on our dining table. Meanwhile, I started paying the bills from my own tips, because Daniel's idea of budgeting was seeing how quickly he could spend his money each month. Groceries, utilities, even the damn cable bill, I covered them all. His promises to get his act together and find a job were as empty as our conversations. The election season was in full swing, and Mr. Gilmore was more eager than ever to parade me around at every possible public event. He'd introduce me with great fanfare, always emphasizing how his son had married a simple girl from the people. At rallies, dinners, and interviews, I wore my smile like a mask, nodding and playing the part of the approachable daughter-in-law. But behind the smiles and the polite applause, I was weary. The constant scrutiny, the endless small talk with people who cared more about my story as a campaign tool than as a person, it was exhausting. More than once, I found myself eyeing the exits at these events, longing for nothing more than to run out and never look back. One evening, after yet another fundraiser that had stretched on for hours, Mr. Gilmore pulled me aside, his hand gripping my shoulder a little too firmly. "Lana, I need you to keep this up. You know, your cooperation is crucial. Remember, your lifestyle, this apartment, it's all thanks to our support." I nodded, the thread in his tone clear as glass. "Of course, Mr. Gilmore. I understand." It wasn't just the campaign that was putting pressure on me. Things at home were no better. Daniel's behavior had escalated from neglect to outright destructiveness. He'd come home late, if he came home at all, often drunk and sometimes barely able to stand. Then came the night that changed everything. Daniel stumbled through the door well past midnight, his face ashen, eyes wild with panic. He collapsed onto the sofa, his hands shaking. "Lana, I've screwed up," he blurted out, his voice a hoarse whisper. "I owe money, a lot of money. To some really bad people. I lost it at the casino, and they're not the type to wait for their cash." My stomach twisted at his words. "How much?" "70,000, he murmured, looking away. I felt cold all over. $70,000? He nodded, miserable. "I need your help, Lana. Please, I can't ask my parents. They'd disown me." The desperation in his eyes was something I couldn't ignore. He grabbed my hands, his grip tight. "I swear, Lana, if you help me with this, I'll change. I know I've been a terrible husband, but I'll do anything to make this right. Please." Something in me broke then. Despite the anger and the disappointment, I couldn't let him face this alone. "Okay, Daniel. I'll help you. But this is it. You have to turn things around." I took out a loan the next day, $70,000 that felt like a noose around my neck. But as I handed the money over, Daniel was like a man reborn. He helped around the house, cut back on the drinking, and for a brief, fleeting moment, I let myself believe that we could actually make this work. We spent evenings together, talking about plans for the future, even daring to dream about starting a family. Daniel was attentive, helping with chores, sharing meals at the same table, things we hadn't done in years. "Maybe we should think about having a kid," he suggested one night as we cleaned up after dinner. I looked at him, surprised but not unhappy at the thought. Really? You think we're ready? He smiled, pulling me close. Yeah, I do. I mean, we're getting back on track, right? A fresh start. I wanted to believe him, to believe in us. And in those moments, it was easy to imagine that everything could actually be okay, that the debts and lies were behind us. But that illusion shattered the night I came home from a double shift at the bar. Tossing my keys on the counter, I headed for the bedroom, my body aching for just a few hours of sleep before doing it all over again. But the scene I walked into snapped me wide awake. Daniel was passed out on our bed, snoring loudly, with two girls I'd never seen before curled up beside him, both just as unconscious. Bottles and glasses littered the nightstand, the stench of alcohol heavy in the air. My heart hammered against my ribcage as a cold rage settled in my gut. Without thinking, I pulled out my phone and started recording. The camera's light cut through the darkness, capturing the damning scene. I nudged Daniel awake, my voice sharp. Daniel, who are these girls? He blinked up at me, confused and still drunk, then waved a dismissive hand as if brushing away the question. They're just my girlfriends, you know? It's not a big deal. We do this sometimes when you're at work. That was it. The final betrayal. I stopped the recording, my hands trembling with a cocktail of emotions, rage, sorrow, disbelief. I stepped out of the room, dialed Mr. Gilmore, and waited for him to pick up. Lana? What's wrong? His voice was cautious, alert. Mr. Gilmore, I'm done. I just caught Daniel in our bed with two other women. I've recorded everything, and I want a divorce, I said, each word measured, heavy with finality. He was at the apartment within the hour, his face a mask of controlled fury as he glanced at the still unconscious figures in my bed. Daniel had woken up by then, looking sheepish and scared as his father berated him in hushed, vicious tones. You idiot! Look what you've done! Turning to me, Mr. Gilmore's tone softened. Lana, I'll handle this. Let's keep it quiet, for everyone's sake. What do you need? $500,000, the apartment sold and the money transferred to me, and the loan I took out for him cleared, I stated, each demand non-negotiable. Mr. Gilmore nodded slowly, calculating. Done. But you must agree to keep this quiet. Move away, start fresh somewhere else. Can you do that? Yes, I said simply. There was nothing left for me here, no reason to stay. And Lana, don't tell his mother. She'd make a scene, and we can't afford that now, not with the elections. The divorce papers came through quietly. I signed them in the dim light of dawn, alone. Mr. Gilmore kept his word. The money was in my account within days, the loan was paid off, and I was free from Daniel and his destructive whims. Settling into my new life in another city felt like breathing fresh air after being submerged underwater for too long. The day I moved into my new apartment in a peaceful neighborhood, I knew I had made the right decision. It was smaller than the luxurious prison I'd left behind, but it was all mine. The first thing I did after unpacking was block every number associated with my old life. Every ring was a potential drag back into that mess, and I wasn't about to let that happen. Then, I went out and bought myself a car. Nothing too fancy, but sleek and new, something just for me. A few days later, I landed a job as an administrator at a local restaurant. It was a step up from waitressing, with regular hours and no late nights. The owner, a wiry woman named Carla, with a sharp tongue and a no-nonsense attitude, took me under her wing. You new to town? Carla asked on my first day, eyeing me with a mixture of curiosity and caution. Yeah, just moved in, I replied, keeping my past tucked away like the folded boxes in my closet. Carla nodded, as if approving my concise answer. Well, here's your desk, and here are your responsibilities. You keep things running smooth, and we'll get along just fine. I appreciate it, Carla. I won't let you down, I promised, eager to prove my worth in this new role. The job was busy, filled with the usual chaos of restaurant life, but I thrived on the structure it brought to my days. I was making my own money, controlling my own fate. It felt good, honest and real. Encouraged by Carla's blunt but fair management style, I decided to enroll in the local college. I wanted more than just to escape my past, I wanted to build something lasting. Night classes in business management seemed like the right path, and stepping into the classroom, I felt a surge of pride. I was doing this for me, no one else. One evening, as I was locking up the restaurant, Carla stopped by my desk. "Heard you're hitting the books at night. That's good. Keep that brain working." I smiled, grateful for her recognition. "Trying to. Figured it's never too late to start fresh, right?" "Damn right," Carla said with a nod. "You ever need help, you let me know. I know a thing or two about keeping a business above water." Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Work, study, and the quiet solitude of my apartment. I relished the normalcy, the mundane moments that I used to take for granted. It was during one of these quiet nights, sitting on my balcony with a cup of tea, that I realized just how much I had changed. The city lights sparkled in the distance, each one a reminder of where I'd been and where I was heading. 2 years had slipped by since I cut all ties with my old life and started anew. I was sitting in my living room, cozy and warm, a book forgotten on my lap, when my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, and hesitating for a split second, I answered. "Lana, this is Patricia Gilmore." The voice came through, high-pitched and frantic. "Daniel is in trouble because of your negligence." I was taken aback. "Mrs. Gilmore, slow down. What are you talking about? What trouble?" She was nearly breathless with agitation. "An unknown friend of Daniel called me. He said Daniel got into a fight with a policeman in a bar. I had to transfer money to keep him out of jail. I took it from our savings, and Gerald doesn't know yet." "Why weren't you there for him?" "Mrs. Gilmore, listen to me very carefully," I said, my voice calm and clear. "Daniel and I have been divorced for 2 years. I haven't seen or spoken to him since." There was a pause, and then, "Divorced? What are you talking about? Why didn't anyone tell me?" "You didn't know because it was meant to be kept quiet for the family's sake, for the election and all. I'm sorry you were left out, but I am no longer part of Daniel's life or your family." "And what happened to the policeman and Daniel?" Her voice cracked, and I could hear the confusion and fear seeping through. Laughing softly, I tried to find some humor in the absurdity of the situation. "Mrs. Gilmore, you've been scammed. There's no doubt about it. These scammers probably made up the whole story about the policeman just to trick you out of your money." There was a pause on the line as the realization sank in. Her voice quivered, fear replacing the anger from moments before. "Scammed? Oh no, what have I done?" Her tone was frantic, the weight of her mistake crashing down. "Can't you just lend me some money to put back before Gerald finds out?" "Please, Lana." "Mrs. Gilmore, I can't. It's not my place anymore. I've moved on. You need to handle this with your family," I replied, firm yet not unkind. Her crying intensified, then turned to anger. "You could help, but you choose not to. You're just as selfish as everyone said." I sighed, a deep, weary release. "I'm sorry you feel that way. I truly hope you sort this out, but I must go now." I hung up before she could reply, her sobs echoing in my ear even after the line went dead. Looking around my peaceful apartment, the stark contrast between my current life and the chaos of the past made me shudder. I picked up my phone again, this time navigating through the settings to block yet another number. As I set the phone down, a sense of finality washed over me. I was truly free now, no longer entangled in the web of deception and greed that had once defined my life. Let me take you back to the start. My name is Marcy, and I've been married to Michael for almost 20 years. We met in college, fell hard and fast, got married a few years after graduation, and had Jamie shortly after that. We were the typical suburban family. Michael worked in sales, I managed a local grocery store, and weekends were for soccer games and family barbecues. That particular November morning was supposed to be like any other. I dropped Jamie off at school. He was in his sophomore year and already talking about colleges, scholarships, the whole deal. I was heading to work, but first decided to check our bank accounts. We'd been saving for Jamie's college in a separate account, something we both promised to contribute to regularly. Michael had been a bit secretive lately, saying he was working on a big deal that would benefit all of us. I trusted him, maybe too much. So, there I was, sitting in the car outside the store before my shift, logging into our online banking. What I saw, or rather, didn't see, hit me like a ton of bricks. The balance was zero. Not low, zero. Panic set in first, then confusion. I dialed Michael immediately. "Michael, where's the money in Jamie's college fund?" My voice was more of a whisper, scared of the answer. "What? Babe, calm down. What money are you talking about?" His voice had that irritatingly calm tone that always signaled trouble. "Marcy, I haven't touched it. Maybe there's some mistake with the bank. Check again." I logged in again, hoping to see a different number. But nothing changed. "No mistake, it's all gone." "What the hell is going on?" "Look, I don't know, okay? I'll sort it out. Just go to work, and we'll talk later." He hung up before I could argue further. But I couldn't let it go. I called in sick, turned the car around, and drove straight to the bank. The manager, a nice woman named Janice who knew us personally, pulled up the records. The color drained from her face as she turned the screen toward me. There had been transfers, large ones, to various accounts over the past few years. All authorized by Michael. I stormed out of the bank, drove home, and waited for Michael. When he walked through the door, the look on his face told me he knew he was caught. "Marcy, before you say anything. Save it, Michael. Years? You've been stealing from our son for years?" My voice was loud enough to shake the pictures on the walls. "Stealing? No, I was investing it. In a business, for us. It was supposed to be a surprise." "A surprise? You surprise someone with a birthday party, not by draining our son's future. How could you do this to us?" I was yelling now, each word sharp and bitter. He started to say something, but stopped when he saw the look on my face. He knew this was different, this was serious. "I need to think. I can't even look at you right now." I walked away, my mind swirling with betrayal, anger, and the terrifying question of how we were going to afford Jamie's college now. The next morning, my mind was still racing. Michael was already at the kitchen table when I walked in, his mother, Gloria, sitting beside him with a cup of coffee in her hands. The air was thick with tension, and I could tell this wasn't going to be an easy conversation. "Michael, I want every penny put back into Jamie's account today," I said, my voice steady but firm. Gloria scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Oh, please, Marcy, don't be so dramatic." Michael was only trying to help the family. I turned to her, shocked by her dismissal. "Dramatic? It's our son's future we're talking about, Gloria. How can you just sit there and defend him? And besides," Gloria added, "it's about time Jamie learned to stand on his own 2 feet. Why should he rely on us to pay for his education?" I stared at them, dumbfounded. "So, you're saying our promise to our son means nothing? That we should just let him fend for himself?" Gloria shook her head. "Look at you, making a mountain out of a molehill." "I'm not going to stand here and be called hysterical for caring about our son's future," I shot back, feeling the heat rise in my cheeks. Michael sighed, rubbing his temples. "Look, Marcy, I think it's best if we just cool off. We're obviously not going to agree on this." "No, we're not," I agreed, my mind made up. "I want a divorce, Michael." The room went silent. Even Gloria stopped her tutaying. "A divorce? Over this? Marcy, you need to think about this more clearly," Michael said, his voice low. "I've never been more clear about anything. You took our son's future away, and you expect me to just accept it? No, I can't and I won't." And I want the house in return for all the money you spent. That's my final decision." Michael laughed, a cruel sound that filled the room. "You think you can just take everything? I'll fight you for the house. I'll fight you for every damn thing in that divorce court." I could feel Gloria's eyes on me, her disdain palpable. But I was beyond caring what she thought. "Fine. Fight all you want. But I'm done here. Come on, Jamie, we're leaving." I called out to my son, who had been waiting in his room, probably overhearing everything. As Jamie and I gathered our things, Gloria's voice followed us. "You're making a mistake, Marcy. You'll see. You'll come crawling back." I didn't even turn around. With every step towards the door, I felt a small piece of my old life fall away, but I also felt a strange sense of freedom. Jamie and I got into the car, and I drove us to my parents' house. We were together, and that's what mattered. A week had barely passed when Michael and his mother, Gloria, decided to storm into my parents' house like they owned the place. I was in the kitchen, helping Mom with dinner, when I heard the front door slam open. There they stood, Michael looking smug and Gloria red-faced with anger. "We've hired the best lawyers, Marcy," Michael announced as if he was declaring war. "And they're going to prove that my mother funded the purchase of our house. So, you might want to reconsider your demands, unless you want to lose everything." Gloria stepped forward, jabbing a finger in my direction. "Yeah, and you better just forget about the money Michael took. Accept the divorce and the house split 50-50, or we'll make sure you and your son end up with nothing." "Listen here, Michael," I shot back, my voice steady despite the anger boiling inside. "I was the one who made the initial payment on that house. We both know that. Your mother's claim doesn't change the truth." Gloria's face turned an even brighter shade of red. "Lies. My money bought that house, and we're going to prove it. When we're done with you, you'll be begging on the streets." Michael nodded, backing up his mother's venomous words. "It's time you face reality, Marcy. You and your son will be out of that house before you know it." My mother, who had been silent until then, finally spoke up. "You have no right to come into our home and speak to my daughter that way. Get out, now." But Gloria wasn't done. She scoffed and turned her rage towards me again. "You think you're smart, huh? Well, let me tell you something, young lady. It's not just about the house. You're going to lose everything because of your stubbornness." That was when my father stepped up, his presence towering over both Michael and Gloria. "I think you've said enough. Both of you, get out of my house now, or I'll throw you out myself." They hesitated, Michael's arrogance fading as he met my father's unwavering gaze. Gloria tugged at his arm, muttering something under her breath as they turned to leave. Once they were gone, the house fell silent except for the sound of my racing heart. My hands were shaking, and I could feel tears threatening to spill over. Later that same day, after dinner had been cleared and we were all trying to find some normalcy, Jamie spoke up. He had been quiet throughout the meal, lost in thought. "Mom, I remembered something weird," he began, looking unsure. "A couple of weeks ago, I saw Dad and Aunt Linda at the mall. They were in the jewelry store." My heart sank. Linda had been my best friend since high school. What were they doing there? I asked, though part of me wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. "They were picking out jewelry. Aunt Linda said it was a gift for you." Jamie's voice trailed off, his expression confused. "A gift for me?" I repeated, feeling a mix of hope and suspicion. "But he never gave me any jewelry." "Yeah, and that's what's weird." They were laughing and looked really close. "Aunt Linda even told me to keep it a surprise." Jamie frowned, clearly troubled by the memory. My mind was racing. None of this made sense. Why would Michael buy jewelry with Linda and not give it to me? And after today's confrontation, everything felt even more suspicious. "I need to get to the bottom of this," I said, more to myself than to anyone else. "I'm going to hire a private detective." I need to know what's going on. I could feel my resolve hardening. If Michael was cheating on me with my best friend, I had to know the truth. A couple of weeks later, I got a call from the detective I'd hired. His voice was grave as he asked me to come to his office to discuss his findings. My stomach churned the entire drive over. When I arrived, he handed me a thick envelope. "Mrs. Harper, I'm sorry to say, the news isn't good," he started, and from there, he laid it all out. The detective had followed Michael and Linda, taken photos, and even got receipts from their purchases, including an expensive necklace that certainly never made its way to my neck. "Your husband and Mrs. Linda have been having an affair. I'm very sorry." The drive home was a blur. When I finally got back to my parents' house, I found Mom and Dad in the living room. I told them everything, showing them the photos and receipts. The shock on their faces mirrored the hollow feeling inside me. "Oh, Marcy, I'm so sorry," Mom said, her voice breaking as she came over to hug me. "That woman has been in our home, shared our meals. How could she?" "I can't believe Linda would do this to me," I whispered, feeling a tear roll down my cheek. "All these years, she's been lying to me, to all of us." Jamie came into the room then, hearing the last part. "Mom, are you okay? What happened?" I wiped my eyes and managed a small smile for him. "It's going to be okay, honey. We just found out something upsetting about Dad and Linda, but we'll get through this. We're together, and that's what counts." That night, as I lay in bed, the betrayal gnawed at me. Michael and Linda had deceived me, stolen from me, and broken my trust. But I knew one thing for sure, I wasn't going to let them destroy me. I would fight back, for my son and for the life I deserved. The next morning, I called Linda and invited her to chat. 2 hours later, I sat across from Linda at the small cafe where we used to meet for our girls' chats, the irony of the situation not lost on me. She seemed oblivious to the storm brewing inside me, smiling as she sipped her coffee. "So, how's Jamie doing, huh? Must be getting ready for college soon?" Linda asked, her voice light and breezy. I clenched my jaw, staring straight at her. "Actually, Jamie's not doing great. He's been robbed by his father's mistress." Her smile faltered, and she set down her cup, a flash of guilt crossing her face. "Marcy, what are you talking about?" "I know about you and Michael, Linda. I've seen the proof." I leaned forward, my voice low and steady. Her face drained of color, her eyes dropping to the table. "Marcy, I can explain," she stammered, fidgeting with the new ring on her finger. I pointed at her ring sharply. "That ring you're wearing? It was bought with money meant for Jamie's education. Money that Michael took from our life savings." Linda's eyes filled with tears, her voice barely a whisper. "I didn't know, Marcy. He told me he was getting a divorce, that you two were practically done." I scoffed, the anger and betrayal churning inside me. "And you believed him? After all these years, you just took his word and didn't think to ask me? To think about Jamie?" She wiped at her eyes, nodding slowly. "He said he would leave you the house and everything in it. He told me he made enough money to cover it all and that he wanted to leave with dignity." "That's a lie, Linda. He's left us with nothing. There's another woman, too, someone from his work. Did you know about her?" The words were like venom, but they needed to be said. Linda shook her head, her face crumpling as she began to sob. "No, I didn't know. I'm so sorry, Marcy. I've been so stupid." For a moment, I just watched her cry, the years of friendship battling with the raw, fresh wound of her betrayal. Then, slowly, I felt my anger start to subside, replaced by a weary sadness. "Look, Linda. I don't know if we can ever go back to how things were. But I appreciate you being honest with me now." She took a deep breath, nodding as she pulled off the ring and slid it across the table. "I'll give you everything back. The jewelry, the car he bought me. It's the least I can do. It won't cover everything." The money's gone, and Jamie's future is up in the air. But it's a start. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of everything pressing down on us. Then Linda looked up, her eyes red but resolute. "Let me help, Marcy. Let's figure this out together. For what it's worth, I want to make things right." We spent the next hour talking, not about the past, but about what we could do moving forward. Linda handed me the keys to the car Michael had bought her, along with a bag containing the jewelry. "I'll do whatever it takes, Marcy. I owe you that much." The morning after my heart-to-heart with Linda, my phone buzzed early. It was Linda again, sounding more urgent than ever. "Marcy, you're not going to believe this. Michael's company is throwing a big bash for his promotion tonight. It's at that fancy place downtown. Everyone will be there, including all the big bosses." That evening, we arrived at the restaurant, a sleek, modern place filled with Michael's colleagues in high spirits. I spotted Michael, laughing and clinking glasses, the picture of success. Seeing him like that, so carefree, fueled my resolve. Linda nudged me. "Ready?" "As I'll ever be." Before I could second-guess myself, I stepped forward just as Michael caught sight of me. His smile vanished, replaced by a scowl. "What the hell are you doing here, Marcy? You need to leave. Now." His attempt to intimidate me in front of his peers only made me stronger. "Actually, I'm here to congratulate you, Michael. Mind if I borrow the spotlight for a moment?" His confusion was palpable as he hesitated. His boss, Mr. Carlson, noticing the exchange, gestured for me to continue. "Please, let's hear what Marcy has to say." With all eyes on me, I moved towards the front where a projector was set up for presentations. "Thank you, Mr. Carlson." The murmurs began as I clicked the remote, and images flashed on screen, photos of Michael and the financial director, cozy and compromising. The crowd gasped, and whispers filled the air. Not only has Michael been unfaithful to his family, but he's also been stealing from the company. Here are the financial records to prove it. The next slide showed documents, clear as day, detailing the fraud Michael and his mistress had committed. The room erupted into chaos. Michael tried to protest, his face turning red. "This is nonsense. She's just a scorned woman." But Mr. Carlson, who had been examining the documents closely, silenced him with a raise of his hand. "Enough, Michael. If these documents are real, you've not only betrayed your family, but also this company." He turned to the financial director, who was now as pale as a ghost. "And you, Jessica, will need to explain a lot. Security will escort you both out until we sort this out. Consider yourselves suspended, effective immediately." Michael looked like he'd been slapped, his eyes darting around the room, finding no allies. He glanced at me, fury and disbelief in his eyes. But I wasn't done yet. "I trusted you, Michael. More than that, I loved you. We built a life together, a family. And you threw it all away. I hope it was worth it." With those final words, I walked away, Linda at my side, her hand squeezing mine in support. The last thing I heard was Mr. Carlson calling for calm as we exited the building. After Michael and his mistress were fired, they had to return all the stolen money to avoid a lawsuit, a small victory in the grand scheme, but a victory nonetheless. Now, I was bracing myself for the biggest fight yet, the divorce and the battle for our house. I sat there with my lawyer, papers neatly stacked in front of us. Michael and his lawyer were across the room, looking less confident than usual. Gloria sat right behind him, her eyes shooting daggers across the room at me. As the judge entered, everyone rose, the room steeped in formality. "Please be seated," the judge commanded, and the session began. My lawyer presented the case succinctly. "Your Honor, we have clear evidence of Mr. Harper's infidelities and misuse of the couple's joint finances. We have bank records, photographic evidence, and testimonies confirming that Mr. Harper diverted family funds to support extramarital affairs." The courtroom was silent, all eyes on us as we presented each piece of evidence. Michael's face grew paler with every document displayed. Then it was Gloria's turn. She stood, almost trembling with fury. "Your Honor, this is all lies. My son is a good man. It's Marcy who drove him to do what he did. Besides, the house they lived in was bought with my money." Her voice was shrill, desperate. I clenched my fists under the table, trying to maintain composure. "Mrs. Harper, do you have any proof of your claims about the house?" the judge asked, his tone skeptical. "Well, I don't have the papers here, but it's true," she stammered. My lawyer then stepped up, handing a stack of documents to the judge. "Your Honor, these are the bank statements and mortgage payments clearly showing that it was, in fact, Marcy who made the initial down payment and subsequent mortgage payments from her personal account." The judge nodded, examining the documents carefully. Michael whispered something to his lawyer, a look of defeat settling over him. Then, the unthinkable happened. Gloria, unable to contain herself, stood up and shouted, "This is all your fault, Marcy. If you'd been a better wife, my son wouldn't have needed other women." The courtroom erupted into murmurs. The judge banged his gavel. "Order! Mrs. Harper, one more outburst like that and I will have you removed from this courtroom." Gloria sank back into her seat, muttering under her breath. After reviewing everything, the judge finally spoke. "Having considered all the evidence presented, it is clear that Mr. Harper has not only been unfaithful but has also significantly mismanaged marital funds. Therefore, the court rules in favor of Mrs. Harper. The house will remain under her ownership, Mr. Harper will return 50% of the misused funds, and additional compensation for emotional distress will be awarded to Mrs. Harper." Michael looked like he had been punched in the gut, his head hanging low. Outside the courtroom, I took a deep breath of free air. It was over. The lies, the deceit, the years of hidden betrayal, finally out in the open and judged accordingly. Jamie had been there, in the courtroom, seen it all. His father's and grandmother's disgraceful behavior left an indelible mark on him. It was after the trial, on a quiet evening at home, when he came to me, his decision weighing heavily on his young shoulders. "Mom, I can't see Dad anymore. Not after everything. I don't think I want to talk to Grandma Gloria either." Jamie's voice was firm, resolute even, but I could see the pain flickering behind his eyes. I pulled him into a hug, my heart aching for him. "It's okay, Jamie. You do what you feel is right for you. I'm here, no matter what." In the weeks that followed, the idea of remaining in the house that was once a symbol of our family's unity felt more and more impossible. I made the decision to sell it, to give Jamie and myself a true fresh start. We chose a smaller, cozier place not far from the college Jamie hoped to attend, a new beginning within reach of his future. Michael's downfall was steep and rapid. His career was shattered, his reputation in tatters. The last I heard, he was barely scraping by, relying on odd jobs and his mother's pension after the hefty sum he had to return to us. One evening, while Jamie and I were unpacking boxes in our new living room, he looked up from a book he'd just shelved. "Mom, do you ever feel bad for Dad?" His question caught me off guard, a simple query filled with complex emotions. I paused, considering my words carefully. "Jamie, I feel sad about how things turned out." "But feeling bad for him? He made his choices, honey. We all have to live with the results of what we do. What's important is that we try to do better, be better." Jamie nodded, a thoughtful frown creasing his brow. "I want to be nothing like him, Mom. And you won't be. You're your own person, with your own choices to make." I ruffled his hair, proud of the young man he was becoming. Life slowly found a new rhythm, our days filled with work, school, and the occasional movie night in our snug living room. I continued my job at the grocery store, the normalcy of work a welcome anchor. As the days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, our new home grew around us like the garden we tended together, slowly, with care, and a lot of love. Reflecting one evening over a cup of tea, I realized that despite the trials, the heartaches, and the upheaval, we had emerged stronger. I had fought for my son's future and my own peace of mind, and won. Hello, I'm Emily. I want to tell you about my life, how it all started so perfectly and then turned into something I never expected. I married Tom, a laid-back guy who ran a small Italian restaurant that his father left him. We lived in a cozy house that my grandma left me when she passed away. It was in this house we started our little family with our son, Jack. In the early days, Tom and I would sit on our back porch after Jack had gone to bed, talking about everything we wanted to do. "We'll save up, buy a big house, maybe have another kid," Tom would say, always with a beer in his hand. "Yeah, and Jack's going to have the best education we can afford. Maybe he'll go to college without needing to worry about student loans," I'd add, thinking about how my own student loans had been a burden for years. Things were good, simple, and happy. But as years passed, while I climbed up the ladder at work, Tom seemed content with just getting by with the restaurant. It didn't grow, it just stayed the same, cozy, but barely making enough. One evening, while we were cleaning up after dinner, I tried to talk to him about it. "Tom, have you thought about maybe expanding the menu or doing some renovations to attract more customers?" Tom shrugged, scrubbing a plate a bit too hard. Why fix what isn't broken? We're doing fine." "But we could be doing better, Tom. Don't you want to grow the business?" I pressed, drying my hands on a towel. Tom set the plate down with a clatter, frustration clear on his face. "Why are you always pushing? Can't you just be happy with what we have? I'm tired of you always wanting more." His words stung, but I let it go for the moment. However, it wasn't just the restaurant that was the problem. As I became the main breadwinner, the tension grew. Tom spent more days at the restaurant, not really working, just escaping the house, and often he'd end up at his mother Susan's place when we argued. One particularly rough day, I decided to confront him about his frequent escapes to his mom's. "You ran off to your mom's again last night? Tom, when you're there, who do you think handles everything here?" He rolled his eyes, tossing his keys on the table. "Oh, come off it, Em. Mom understands me. Plus, she doesn't nag me about money or working more." That hurt, especially since I had been the one covering for his lack of income, even sending $700 to Susan every month to help her out. It was getting harder to keep up with all the bills and expenses. Later that week, I was on the phone with Susan, trying to explain the situation. "Susan, I'm doing what I can, but Tom needs to step up. We're struggling here." Instead of understanding, Susan lashed out. "Emily, you're his wife. It's your job to support him, not push him around. You're always after my boy to change. Can't you see you're the problem?" Her words were harsh, and I felt a wave of anger wash over me. "I am supporting him, Susan. More than you know. I send you money every month, remember? How can you call me the problem? You're a gold digger, that's what you are, always counting every penny," she shot back, before hanging up. As the night fell, I watched Tom retreat to the couch, beer in hand, lost in his phone, while I put Jack to bed, the weight of my conversation with his mother heavy on my shoulders. Life at home got tougher when Tom's restaurant hit rock bottom. He had to let go of his staff one by one, till it was just him tossing pizzas in a quiet corner of town. Soon, even the pizza didn't pull enough folks in to keep the lights on. The day he shut down for good, he came home looking defeated but with an edge of defiance in his eyes. "You know, Em, this isn't the end. It's just a bump," he said, trying to keep his voice steady as he took off his apron for the last time. I was sitting at the kitchen table, bills spread out like a deck of bad cards. "A bump? Tom, the restaurant's closed. We need another income, not tomorrow, but now." He bristled at that, his pride wounded. "I'll find something, but I'm not just going to take any job. I've got my standards. I was a business owner, Em." "And what does that mean now, Tom? We need real money, not standards," I shot back, frustration boiling over. He just shook his head, muttering about not being any desk jockey at some company. "I have a degree, Emily. I'm looking for a chief's position, nothing less." I couldn't believe his audacity. Your business just tanked, and you think you can land at the top somewhere else just like that? I snapped, unable to keep the edge out of my voice. He didn't reply, just stormed out, probably to his mother's. That's how it was now. When things got tough, Tom vanished. The weekend brought no peace, only his mother, Susan, barging in with her own set of demands. She came just as I was setting up lunch, her timing as impeccable as her nerve. "Emily, you need to talk to your bosses. Get Tom a good position at your place. He deserves it," she commanded, as if it were the most obvious solution. I laughed, despite myself. It was a harsh, short sound. "Susan, that's not how it works. I started at the bottom and worked my way up. They don't just hand out top jobs because I say so." She narrowed her eyes, her lips thinning. "You just don't want him succeeding there. Afraid he might overshadow you, huh?" Seriously? Tom walking into a senior role with no experience is not happening. And it's not about fear. It's about reality, I explained, slicing the tension with every chop of the salad knife. Lunch went on with a chilly air swirling around us. Tom was quiet, picking at his food, probably stewing over his own bruised ego and his mother's words. Tom's days became a blur of nothingness. He'd lounge around, beer in hand, glued to his phone, while I juggled work, house chores, and caring for our son, Jack. Each evening I came home to find the house a mess and dinner nowhere on the horizon. "Tom, could you at least start dinner? I'm running on fumes here," I'd say as I dropped my bags, kicking off my shoes. He'd grunt, not taking his eyes off his phone. "Why? You do it better. I'm tired too, you know." Tired from what? It burned me up inside, seeing him so idle, especially when Jack would tug at my sleeve, hungry and waiting. "And Jack? Did you pick him up from school today?" I asked one evening, already knowing the answer. "No, your mom did. Forgot to tell you," he mumbled, barely audible over the TV. My mother, thankfully, lived nearby and had become my unplanned backup, ever since Tom had stopped bothering with even the smallest responsibilities. "Tom, he's your son too. He needs you." I tried to keep my voice even, but it was hard. This would usually be the point where he'd get up and leave, the door slamming behind him, a punctuation to our daily script. And true to form, he'd disappear, off to who knows where, leaving me to handle everything. One day, the routine took a darker turn. I had started noticing money missing from my purse. At first, it was a few dollars here and there, but then whole bills began to vanish. One evening, after double-checking my cash, I confronted him. "Tom, have you been taking money from my purse?" He looked away, then back at me. "Needed some cash for beer." "Beer? Really, Tom? You're taking cash like a thief now?" "How dare you call me a thief? I'm your husband," he shot back, voice rising. Before we could go any further, Susan barged in, her timing impeccable as always. She must have caught the tail end of our argument because her face was thunderous as she laid into me. "Emily, all you care about is money. Can't you see the man is struggling? You should be supporting him, not accusing him." "Support him? By letting him steal from me? What about Jack? What about our bills?" My voice was rising too, the stress of the last few months boiling over. Tom had slumped back on the couch, tuning out the women in his life arguing over him, his gaze fixed on some invisible point on the floor. The argument spun out, leaving a cold silence in its wake. Susan left in a huff, and Tom just sat there, saying nothing, doing nothing. Jack fell ill just as the last light of summer faded. His fever spiked one evening, and no amount of soothing or cool cloths seemed to help. I sat by his bed, thermometer in hand, my heart sinking with each beat that confirmed the fever wasn't breaking. Tom was no help, as usual, sprawled on the couch, lost in the glow of his phone. "Tom, can you at least check if we have any more fever reducer in the medicine cabinet?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. He grunted something unintelligible and slowly hoisted himself up, but I knew I'd be faster. Jack was whimpering softly, his small hands clutching mine, and every second counted. I brushed a kiss on his forehead and hurried to the kitchen myself. The next morning, the doctor confirmed it was more serious than a simple cold. He needs medication, and we should run some tests. Better to be safe, he advised, scribbling on his pad. Tests meant money. More money than what was left after all the bills and Tom's unchecked spending. I pulled up my banking app, heart hammering as I transferred the last of our savings for Jack's treatment, including the $700 usually reserved for Susan. It was the only option. No sooner had I made the decision, Susan stormed in, her face thunderous. "Emily, where's my money? It's the first of the month, you know." I was repacking Jack's small backpack, ready for another trip to the doctor. "Susan, I had to use that money for Jack. He's very sick, we need it for his tests and medication." Susan's eyes narrowed, her lips thinning into a harsh line. "You expect me to believe you don't have money elsewhere?" "That was my money, Emily. I need it." I stepped back, holding up my hands, the protective mother in me rising fast. "Jack comes first. He's a child, he's sick, and he needs his mother to take care of him. I'm not going to apologize for that." "Well, I should have known you'd pull something like this. Keeping money from me for that boy." Susan spat the words out like they were poison. That stung, and my temper flared. "That boy? Susan, that's your grandson. How can you be so cold?" "I don't need lessons from you, Emily. If you don't pay me by tomorrow, you'll regret it," she hissed, her face twisted in anger. The threat hung in the air, heavy and dark. But seeing Jack, so small and frail in the other room, gave me the strength I needed. "Get out, Susan. Now. I won't have you threatening me in my own house, not today, not ever." Susan looked like she might say more, but the look in my eyes must have told her all she needed to know. She stormed out, slamming the door behind her, leaving a silence that rang in my ears. Tom dressed in silence and followed her out. I returned to Jack's side, my hands trembling as I smoothed back his hair. He looked up at me, his eyes trusting and filled with a pain that broke my heart. "It's okay, baby. Mommy's here," I whispered, kissing his forehead, my decision cemented in my heart. The days blurred into a haze of hospital visits and restless nights. Tom's absence in the household was almost a silent relief, no arguments, no disdainful looks. But then, a week of uneasy quiet was shattered. I noticed it first on a mundane Thursday afternoon. Checking my bank app for the balance, my stomach dropped. Several large withdrawals had wiped out nearly everything we had left. Panic tightening in my chest, I scrolled through the transaction history, my heart racing, every withdrawal a stab of betrayal. Calling Tom was useless, he didn't pick up, hadn't picked up for days. With a heavy hand, I blocked the card, cutting off his plundering. It was only then, amidst the swirling chaos of my life, that I realized how deep Tom's selfishness ran. But nothing could have prepared me for what came next. Exactly 1 week after he vanished, Tom returned, not alone, but with Susan swaggering by his side. They found me in the living room, floor littered with Jack's toys and medical receipts. "Emily, we have news," Tom announced, an unfamiliar smirk playing on his lips. "I won the lottery. $10 million. And before you ask, no, you won't see a dime of it. I'm filing for divorce." The room spun. "You what? Tom, you can't be serious. What about Jack?" His mother laughed, a sound that sent shivers down my spine. "Oh, Emily, always playing the saint. You've underestimated my son all these years. Now he's rich, and you're nothing. He'll find someone better, younger." Tom nodded, picking up a duffel bag by the door. "Yeah, I'm moving out. To live with Mom. You'll manage on your own, won't you? You were so good at it." Susan put her arm around him, leading him to the door. "Let's leave the gold digger to her mess. We have better places to be." As the door slammed shut, the finality of the situation crashed down on me. Betrayal, abandonment, theft, Tom had left me with nothing but challenges and heartache. But as the initial shock waned, a fiery resolve began to build within me. They thought they could crush me, leave me broken and destitute? No, I wouldn't let this stand. I called my lawyer, my voice firm. Tom used our money to buy that ticket. I want to contest the winnings. My lawyer was cautious, but supportive. It's going to be a tough fight, Emily, but we'll give it everything we've got. As I hung up, the weight of the journey ahead settled on my shoulders. But there was a strength in me that had been forged in the fires of this betrayal. For myself, for Jack, I would fight. And this time, I wasn't just fighting for survival, I was fighting for justice. The days leading up to the court hearing were a whirlwind of preparation. My lawyer, Mr. Daniels, was meticulous. We gathered every piece of evidence, bank statements, financial records, everything that showed the flow of money from my account to sustain our household while Tom contributed nothing. Emily, it's a solid case. The fact that he used your bank card to buy the lottery ticket is our ace, Mr. Daniels reassured me as we sat in his office surrounded by piles of paperwork. As the court date approached, tension simmered just below the surface of my daily routine. Then, 2 days before we were due in court, Tom and Susan showed up unannounced. I was in the kitchen, Jack playing at my feet, when I heard the familiar slam of the car door. They burst through the door, faces red with anger. "You're actually going through with this, Emily? You're suing your own husband?" Tom roared, his voice filling the small space. Susan was quick to chime in, her words sharp and venomous. "Greedy, that's what you are. Trying to take what doesn't belong to you." I stood my ground, feeling Jack press against my leg, seeking comfort. "It's not just Tom's money. He bought the ticket with our funds that I provided because he couldn't. You just can't stand to see me happy, can you? Always need to be in control, Emily." Tom's face was twisted in a sneer. "It's not about control, Tom. It's about what's fair. You walked out, remember? You and your mother laughed at me, said I'd be left with nothing." My voice was steady, fueled by the flicker of anger that had been ignited by their accusations. The shouting match could have escalated, but I wasn't about to let that happen in front of Jack. "You need to leave. Now. We'll settle this in court," I said firmly. Their departure was loud and messy, but the house felt cleaner even after they left. I hugged Jack close, whispering assurances that everything would be all right. In the courtroom, the air was thick with tension. Tom sat across from us, his lawyer whispering in his ear, while Susan glared daggers in my direction. When Mr. Daniels presented the bank statements and financial records, I felt a small victory each time Tom's lawyer faltered in response. The judge listened intently, his gaze often lingering on Tom as the evidence of his financial dependency on me was laid bare. The purchase of the lottery ticket with funds from a joint account, effectively making it a marital asset, is central to this case, Mr. Daniels argued convincingly. Tom tried to argue his case, his voice booming in the quiet of the courtroom. "I was the one who bought the ticket. It was my decision, my luck. But not your money, Mr. Thompson. And luck, unfortunately for you, does not override the law," the judge replied, his tone indicating his impatience with Tom's interruptions. After hours of back and forth, the judge delivered the verdict. "Considering the evidence presented, it is clear that Mr. Thompson was financially dependent on Mrs. Thompson during the period of the ticket purchase. The ticket, therefore, is considered a marital asset. I award 3/4 of the lottery winnings to Mrs. Thompson and 1/4 to Mr. Thompson." Tom's face went white, Susan looked like she might faint. They were stunned, disbelief etched across their features. A few months after the court decision, life settled into a new, calmer rhythm. The divorce papers came through, officially ending what had become a draining chapter in my life. It was time to focus on the future, a future that now seemed a lot brighter thanks to the court's decision. I had heard countless stories of lottery winners who blew through their fortunes with nothing to show for it. Determined not to fall into that trap, I reached out to an old college friend, Mike, who had made a name for himself in the world of investment. "Mike, I need some advice on how to handle this situation wisely. I don't want to end up another cautionary tale," I confessed over coffee one brisk morning. He nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. Emily, it's smart of you to think this way. Let's look at some stable investments that can offer you growth and security. We pored over charts and projections, discussing various companies that showed potential. Mike's expertise was invaluable, and by the end of our meeting, I felt confident about where to invest. I think a mix of tech and renewable energy stocks would be a solid choice for part of the funds. And putting a chunk into a savings account for Jack's education sounds perfect, Mike suggested, marking some options on his tablet. Meanwhile, Tom and Susan's handling of their share was the talk of the town. Tom had splurged on a flashy new sports car and was often seen driving around, showing off to anyone who'd pay attention. Susan adorned herself with expensive jewelry and clothes, reveling in her newfound status. One afternoon, while picking up Jack from school, I bumped into an acquaintance who couldn't wait to share the latest gossip. Emily, have you seen Tom's new car? It's worth a fortune. And Susan, she's living it up like there's no tomorrow, she said, her eyes wide with excitement. I just shook my head, a small smile playing on my lips. Yeah, I heard. But that's their choice. I'm just focusing on what's best for Jack and me. At home, I updated my financial plans, checking in with Mike regularly. Each decision, each investment, was a step towards a stable and secure life. I was determined to give Jack every opportunity one possibly could, without the shadow of past mistakes looming over us. Mommy, when I grow up, can I go to college like you did? Jack asked one evening as we looked at his newly opened savings account online. Absolutely, sweetheart. And you'll have the funds to do so without worrying about money, I assured him, pulling him into a hug. That's cool. I want to learn lots of things, he said, his eyes bright with the promise of endless possibilities. Gradually, life had normalized into a comfortable routine. Jack was thriving at school, and our investments were performing well. I had managed to put the past behind us, focusing on our future. But then, the past decided to make an unwelcome return. I heard it first from a close friend during a casual coffee meetup. Emily, have you heard about Tom? He's lost everything, his car, the money. Heard he's neck deep in gambling debts now. I sipped my coffee, masking my surprise. Really? That's unfortunate. And Susan, she's been pawning off her jewelry. Seems they're both hitting rock bottom after all that show-off, she added, shaking her head in disbelief. It wasn't long before Tom himself stood on my doorstep, a shadow of his former self. His expensive clothes gone, replaced by worn jeans and a faded jacket. His eyes, once so full of arrogance, now held a desperate, hollow look. Emily, can we talk? His voice was hoarse, as if he'd rehearsed this speech 100 times. I hesitated but nodded, stepping aside to let him in. Jack was at a friend's house, so we had privacy, not that I wanted to prolong his visit. Tom took a deep breath, looking around the living room as if seeing it for the first time. I've lost everything, Emily. The money, the car. I've got nothing left. And I miss my family. I miss you. I raised an eyebrow, unable to keep the skepticism out of my voice. You miss the money, you mean? No, it's not just that. I've been doing some thinking, a lot actually. I was hoping, maybe we could start over? His gaze was pleading, but all I could see were the years of lies and negligence. I let out a short laugh, more out of disbelief than amusement. Start over? After everything you put us through? You walk out, call me a gold digger, waste your fortune, and now you want to come back like nothing happened? He shuffled his feet, looking anywhere but at me. I know I messed up, Emily. I really do. But I'm willing to change, to be better. Tom, you walked out when you thought you didn't need us anymore. You showed your true colors. Now, you're just sorry because you're broke and alone, I said, my voice firm. He looked deflated, the reality of my words hitting him hard. So, that's it then? There's no chance? Tom, I forgave you a long time ago for my peace, not so you could come back whenever you hit rock bottom. Jack and we're doing great, and I intend to keep it that way. With a heavy sigh, he turned and left, his shoulders slumped in defeat. I watched him go, feeling a chapter firmly closing behind him. As I picked up Jack later that day, his laughter filling the car, I knew beyond a doubt that no amount of lottery fortune could ever compare to the wealth we had in each other. Our journey hadn't been easy, but it was ours, and it was filled with real, priceless love. Working in the high-end furniture game, you meet all sorts. But Jake? He was something else. Every Thursday, like clockwork, he'd stroll into the showroom with a coffee in hand and a lopsided grin that said he owned the place, even though he never bought squat. I remember the first time he walked in. I was arranging a display of Italian leather sofas, real pricey stuff. He sauntered over, his eyes scanning the price tags, but not in the way most folks do. "Hey there," he started, leaning too close to a lamp that cost more than most people's rent. "What's the story with this one? Looks comfy enough to sleep on forever." I smirked, stepping in before he could test that theory. "It's handcrafted. Top of the line. But yeah, definitely not for napping." Jake chuckled, running a hand through his messy hair. "Guess I'll have to keep my shoes off then." We chatted, mostly him asking about the furniture, me trying to gauge if he was serious about buying anything. Turns out, he wasn't. That first day, he left with a wave and a "see you around." One slow afternoon, he dropped by with that same casual swagger. The store was dead, which meant I couldn't avoid a longer convo. "So, Elsie, right? You ever get tired of talking about couches and tables all day?" I leaned against the counter, crossing my arms. "It pays the bills. Besides, it's not so bad." "What's your deal anyway? You come in here all the time, but never buy anything. Are you in the biz, or just like messing with me?" Jake's laugh was a full-bodied sound that filled the room. "Nah, I'm not messing with you. Just like the vibe here, I guess. Plus, you're kinda fun to talk to." That day, he stayed longer than usual. We talked about everything, music, movies, you name it. He had an opinion on everything and a story to match. When he finally left, he turned at the door. "Hey, Elsie? You wanna grab coffee sometime? Outside of these expensive walls?" I hesitated. This was new territory. "Sure, why not? But if you're planning to run a tab there too, I'm bringing a calculator." "Deal," he said with a laugh, and then he was gone. Coffee with Jake became our thing. Every time we met, he'd pick a spot as eclectic as the furniture he never bought. Each cup of coffee felt like a continuation of a conversation that never really ended. It flowed from furniture to life plans, from jokes to personal dreams. A year flew by since Jake and I started dating. He had this knack for making ordinary days feel like little adventures. It wasn't just coffee dates anymore. We had road trips, late-night movie marathons, and lazy Sundays spent wandering through flea markets. He seemed genuine, you know? Like a real stand-up guy. Then, out of the blue, during a picnic in the city park, nothing fancy, just us and some takeaway sandwiches, Jake got down on one knee. I almost choked on my soda. "Elsie, will you marry me?" he asked, holding up a ring that caught the sunlight just right. I laughed, half because I was nervous, and half because it felt so right. "Are you serious right now?" "Dead serious. I want all my tomorrows to start with you." His eyes were all hopeful, like a kid waiting to see if he'd won the top prize at a carnival game. I didn't need to think about it. "Yes, Jake. Of course, yes." The next thing was meeting his folks. Jake had mentioned them, but we hadn't spent time together, and from what he said, they were a bit uptight. He decided it was time to introduce me properly, so he planned a dinner at their place. When we arrived, their house was, let's just say, eclectic. Every corner crammed with some fancy piece from a different era or style. It was like walking into a museum where all the exhibits got mixed up. Jake's mom, Lydia, was as cold as the November air when she opened the door. "You must be Elsie," she said, eyeing me like I was a piece of furniture she couldn't quite place. "Yes, nice to meet you," I managed, trying not to let her scrutiny get to me. We sat down to dinner, and the vibe was stiff. Jake tried to lighten the mood, but his dad, Harold, only thought a bit after Jake mentioned my job at the luxury salon. "So, you work with expensive furniture? Designer pieces?" Harold asked, his tone shifting from indifferent to slightly intrigued. "That's right," I said. "I help people choose pieces that work for their homes." Lydia perked up too. "And you have savings? That's good. Very good." The conversation slowly turned to their interest in my financial stability rather than getting to know me. It was awkward, but I played along. After dinner, Lydia cornered me in their living room turned bizarre showroom. "Elsie, dear, could you suggest something for this room? It feels a bit cluttered," she said, waving a dismissive hand around. I looked around, biting my tongue to avoid saying it looked like a yard sale gone mad. Instead, I put on my professional smile. "Well, you might consider streamlining the styles. Maybe pick a theme or a period you like and build around that. There are some great, affordable alternatives to these high-end pieces that can give you a cohesive look without breaking the bank." Lydia's nose wrinkled. "I don't want alternatives. I want the real deal, the stuff you sell in your store. I just thought, with your discount or whatever, you could help us out." The way she said it, like I owed them something, irked me. But Jake was watching us, a hopeful look in his eyes, like he wanted this to go well. "I'll see what I can do," I said finally, even though I knew I'd be careful about any help I offered. Wedding talks with Jake and his parents were like walking into a hurricane and trying to stop the wind. His folks had their hearts set on a blowout bash. But here's the kicker. Lydia, with her taste for the finer things, dropped this gem during dinner one night. Women always dream of big weddings, so they should foot the bill, right? Her smirk told me she wasn't just throwing ideas around. She meant it. I nearly choked on my water. "Well, Lydia, this woman dreams of a simple wedding. We're not breaking the bank or my sanity over one day." Jake, caught in the crossfire, gave me that look, the "please go easy on my mom" look. But nah, not this time. "Elsie's right," he finally said, though his voice had the weight of a man walking to the gallows. "We'll keep it simple." The wedding day came, and true to my word, it was simple, beautiful, but understated. Jake's parents plastered on their best sour grapes faces throughout the ceremony. I caught Lydia muttering to a relative, "You'd think a girl who sells fancy furniture could put on a better show." I let it slide. The day was about us, not them. I was floating, my heart full, as I said I do, to a modest gathering of our closest friends and family in the little garden behind our favorite cafe. Post-wedding life kicked off with Jake suggesting we rent a large apartment. "You can deck it out just how you like," he said, knowing full well his bank account was running on fumes. "I'll pitch in when things pick up for me." So, I signed a lease for a chic place that cost a pretty penny, $2,500 a month. My savings took the hit for the furniture and appliances. I went all out, styling it into a space that could have graced the pages of a design mag. When his parents visited, Lydia's eyes nearly popped out. "This place, it's like something out of a movie," she gasped, touching the suede of the couch like it might vanish. "I want this. All of this." Jake beamed like he'd built the place himself. "Elsie has an eye for style," he boasted to his friends over drinks one evening, the apartment serving as the perfect backdrop for his tall tales of taste. "But the bills? All mine. Rent checks, furniture receipts, you name it." My bank account knew the truth, even if Jake was playing the part of the man of the house. One particularly sharp memory was when Lydia pulled me aside during one of their visits, her voice a mix of honey and vinegar. "Elsie, darling, maybe you could help us do the same with our place? Since you're so good with money and all." The way she said it, like I was some kind of cash wizard, it almost made me laugh. Almost. "Lydia, decorating's one thing, but managing money's another. You start with a budget, something realistic." Her face fell. Clearly, budget was a dirty word in her book. But I wasn't about to school my mother-in-law on finances on top of everything else. The grind at the luxury furniture salon paid off. After months of hustling, the bosses noticed, and bam, promotion landed in my lap. They shuffled me over to the wholesale department, a whole new game with bigger clients and bulk deals. The team there was tight-knit, but they welcomed me with open arms. One person, in particular, made the transition smoother, my new boss, Sarah. She was around my age, sharp as a tack, and had an eye for design that even I admired. We clicked right off the bat, swapping stories about nightmare clients and dream projects over coffee breaks. One evening, back at our plush apartment that I'd decked out from my own pocket, I mentioned Sarah to Jake over dinner. "She's got this killer instinct for deals, you know? Closed 2 just this week that everyone thought were dead in the water," I said, passing him the salt. Jake, munching on his spaghetti, looked intrigued. "Sounds like a powerhouse. We should have her over for dinner, show off some of your handiwork here. Might be good for your career, huh?" So, we invited Sarah over the following weekend. I spent the day tidying up, while Jake decided he was Gordon Ramsay. The menu was his doing: roast chicken, garlic mashed potatoes, and green beans, fancy, but not too over the top. Sarah arrived on time, her eyes widening as she stepped into the living room. "Wow, Elsie, this place is incredible. You did all this?" "All her," Jake chimed in, leading her on a tour. "Wait till you see the dining setup." Dinner was lively, thanks to Jake. He was on a roll, cracking jokes, refilling glasses, laughing a little too loud. At some point, he was more of a host than I was in my own home. I caught him a few times, being extra attentive to Sarah, laughing a touch too heartily at her jokes, which were funny, but not that funny. It bugged me enough that I pulled him aside while Sarah was in the restroom. "Hey, what's with the show?" I whispered, nodding toward the dining room. Jake kept his voice low, a serious look crossing his face for just a second. "I am trying to impress her. For you. Maybe she'll speed up another promotion or something." I frowned. "I don't need you to charm my boss for a promotion, Jake. I can handle my career." When Sarah came back, we rounded off the evening with dessert, chocolate cake, Sarah's favorite, as I'd mentioned to Jake. He listened, at least when it suited his plans. After Sarah left, praising the meal and the company, Jake slumped on the couch, grinning like he'd won a prize. "See? Told you it'd go great." I sat beside him, not quite sharing the sentiment. "It was nice, but don't do that again." "I don't need a show, just be normal next time." Jake just waved a hand, dismissing my concerns as he turned on the TV. "You worry too much. It was fine." But it wasn't fine, not really. His act felt off, like he was playing a part. Since the promotion, my paycheck had grown nicely, which, naturally, led Jake to find new ways to spend it. First up, his wardrobe. "Babe, I can't keep wearing these old suits. If you want me to be promoted too, I gotta look the part," he'd argued one evening, thumbing through a catalog of designer suits that cost more than our rent. "Fine, we'll update your closet. But keep it sensible, okay?" I conceded, figuring if it boosted his confidence, it might help him in his own career. The new Jake was a dapper one, and he was all too eager to show off his revamped style. Not long after the wardrobe overhaul, he had another idea. How about dinner out with Sarah again? Could be fun, right? It sounded harmless enough, so I agreed. The night was a success, full of laughter and pricey wine. At the end of the evening, when the check came, Jake made a show of grabbing it. "Let me get that for you," he told Sarah with a flourish. She smiled, a bit awkwardly. "Oh, you don't have to, but thank you, Jake." Then, with his hand on the leather folder, he leaned in close to me. "Babe, can you cover this? Just play along." Puzzled and slightly annoyed, I nodded, slipping my card to the waiter while Sarah was distracted. Jake was beaming like he'd just closed a major deal, and I couldn't help but feel like I was being played in my own life. This pattern didn't stop. Dinners turned into weekend getaways, which Jake insisted on initiating, and I unwittingly financed. He'd tell Sarah, "Don't worry about the cost, we've got it," while winking at me across the room. It was during one such trip, a luxurious beach resort stay, that I hit my breaking point. As I signed yet another exorbitant bill, Jake clapped me on the back. "Isn't this great? Sarah's having a wonderful time. Good for your career, this." That night, in our hotel room, I confronted him. "Jake, I can't keep this up. These trips, these dinners. It's too much. We're supposed to be a team, but I feel like your bank more than your wife." Jake's face darkened, his voice cold and sharp. "I'm doing this for you, for us. If you can't see that, maybe you should just enjoy it alone. I'm busting my ass here trying to help your career." After that, things changed. Jake started staying late at work, or at least that's what he said. Sudden meetings, unexpected calls, it became his new normal. I was sad, sure, but also furious. I wasn't going to be his meal ticket anymore. The joy of our dinners and trips had soured, turning into a reminder of how much I was losing, not just money, but a partner I thought I knew. The call from Sarah to come to her office immediately sent a cold wave of anxiety through me. What could it be? My mind raced with every possible mistake I might have made, every deadline, every email. I knocked on her office door, my heart hammering in my chest, and stepped inside. Sarah was sitting behind her desk, her expression serious, the usual warmth absent. My gaze fell on an alarming number of bouquets and unopened gift boxes piled in one corner. "Elsie, please, have a seat," she gestured to the chair across from her. "We need to talk about something important." Her tone was so grave it made my stomach turn. I sat down, clutching my hands in my lap, preparing for the worst. Sarah sighed, her eyes meeting mine with a mixture of concern and discomfort. "It's about Jake," she started, and my heart sank. "His behavior has been, well, inappropriate." I blinked, confused. "Inappropriate how?" She gestured to the gifts. "He's been sending these. Flowers, jewelry, even designer clothes. It's excessive and, frankly, uncomfortable for me. He's crossing professional and personal boundaries, Elsie." I felt a hot flush of embarrassment. I had no idea," I stammered, feeling naive and foolish. Sarah leaned forward, her voice softening. "I value our friendship, and I respect you immensely, Elsie. That's why I need to be honest. He's making advances. I've told him repeatedly that I'm not interested, that I see him only as your husband, but he isn't listening." I swallowed hard, a lump forming in my throat. "Thank you for telling me, Sarah. I'll handle it." My voice was a whisper, barely holding back tears. I got home, still reeling, only to find Jake in the living room, a suitcase by his side. His demeanor was light, almost giddy, which only fueled my growing anger. "There you are. I've got news." He beamed at me impudently, as if oblivious to the storm inside me. "I've decided it's time for a fresh start. Quit my job today, and I think it's best if my parents move in here. You should find another place." His words hit me like a physical blow. "What are you talking about, Jake? Your parents? Why would I leave?" He shrugged, annoyingly calm. "Come on, Elsie. This place is too good for just us. And let's be honest, it fits their style more. Plus, you can afford another spot, no big deal, right?" I stared at him, disbelief and anger intertwining. "No big deal? You cheat, you lie, you spend my money, and now you kick me out? Whoa, cheat? What are you on about?" His feigned ignorance was infuriating. "Don't play dumb, Jake. Sarah told me everything, the gifts, the advances. How could you?" My voice cracked, tears threatening to spill. Jake's face hardened. "So what? She's richer and more promising than you, so I just want to get a better life. Just pack up and go, Elsie." His words were a dagger, cutting through any remaining ties of affection I had for him. That night, I lay in the spare bedroom, the reality of my crumbling marriage suffocating me. Jake's betrayal was clear, his intentions laid bare. By morning, I knew what I had to do. The next morning, I had found a new apartment online, a smaller, quieter place that felt like a fresh start. I signed the lease electronically and called the movers, all before Jake had even stirred from his sleep. As the movers started arriving, I was methodically showing them around, pointing out what to take. I'd gathered all the receipts and proofs of purchase for the furniture, my furniture, that I'd paid for with my hard-earned money. I was ready, determined. Jake stumbled out of the bedroom, bleary-eyed and confused as he saw the movers loading up boxes. "What's going on, Elsie? Why are you taking the furniture?" I held up the folder stuffed with receipts. "Because it's mine. I bought it, I paid for it, and it's coming with me. Any questions?" He opened his mouth, then closed it, the reality hitting him as his eyes swept over the evidence in my hands. Just then, his parents burst through the door. His mother, Lydia, took one look at the scene, movers carrying out chairs and tables, and she lost it. "Stop. Stop right now. Put my furniture back." The movers paused, looking unsure. I nodded firmly at them. "Keep going, guys. It's all documented." Lydia was frantic, her voice rising in panic as she turned to Jake. "How are we supposed to live here without any furniture? What are we going to do?" I couldn't help but laugh. "Oh, don't worry, Lydia. I'm sure Jake's new girlfriend will furnish your lives splendidly," I said, the sarcasm dripping from every word. His mother looked at him hopefully, her eyes darting back and forth between the emptying apartment and her son. "And your little boss is going to buy us all this? Is she going to take care of us now?" I shook my head, almost in disbelief at their audacity. "Actually, I spoke to her yesterday. She wants nothing to do with you or Jake. She's sending back every ridiculous gift he bought." The look on Jake's face was priceless, a mix of shock, embarrassment, and a realization that his schemes were crumbling around him. Lydia's wrath turned to her son as she poked him hard in the chest. "You fool. We could have had a good life here with Elsie supporting us, and you ruined it." Jake's desperation was palpable as he turned to me, his voice shaky. "Elsie, please, don't do this. We can fix it. We can start over." I handed him an envelope, the divorce papers I had prepared. "This is the only thing left to start over. My lawyer will call you." As I walked out of the apartment, I didn't look back. I was leaving behind more than just a bad marriage and a duplicitous husband. I was leaving behind the old Elsie who tolerated far too much. Settling into my new apartment was like breathing fresh air after being submerged underwater for too long. The place wasn't as large as the last, but every square inch of it was mine, truly mine. I threw myself into decorating, picking pieces that weren't just stylish but spoke to my newfound independence. I went for bold colors this time, vibrant blues and emerald greens, each room a testament to starting over. Meanwhile, Jake and his parents weren't faring so well. Last I heard, they couldn't keep up with the $2,500 rent without my paycheck and had to downsize dramatically. They ended up in a cramped, run-down place on the other side of town. Jake refused to settle for a regular job. He bounced around, looking for another golden ticket, while his mom, Lydia, had no choice but to get a retail job. Their palace built on expectations had crumbled, and from what snippets I caught through mutual friends, so had their tolerance for each other. Then, one afternoon as I was setting up a new art piece in the living room, my phone rang. The sweet, sugary tone of Lydia's voice oozed through the speaker when I answered. "Elsie, darling, it's Lydia. How have you been? We've all missed you so much over here." I almost dropped the phone, half laughing, half in disbelief. "Missed me, Lydia, or my paycheck? Let me guess, you want me to come back? To what? Watch Jake chase dreams while I foot the bill? No thanks, Lydia." "You don't understand, Elsie, we're family." She tried again, her voice now a mix of desperation and saccharine. "Family?" I scoffed. "Family doesn't use each other, Lydia. You should try supporting yourselves for a change." Before she could respond, I hung up and blocked the number. That part of my life was closed, sealed, and good riddance to it. In contrast to the chaos that was my past life, my career was flourishing. Sarah and I had grown closer, her respect for me solidifying after I handled the personal turmoil with as much grace as I could muster. She hinted last week that another promotion was on the horizon, something that would put me even more in control of my professional path. It was like the universe rewarding me for all the hardships. One evening, sitting in my newly decorated living room, I reflected on everything that had happened. The apartment looked incredible, a true reflection of my style and spirit. I had new friends coming over that night, colleagues who appreciated me for my skills and company, not for what my bank account could do for them. The doorbell rang, pulling me from my thoughts. I opened the door to smiling faces, genuine and happy to see me. As we gathered around the sleek, modern dining table I'd picked out myself, laughter filled the space, bouncing off walls that echoed a new chapter of my life.